Trump repeatedly campaigned against over the last decade. His Secretary of Defense right now floating that idea. There could be a forever war in the Middle East now.
And as Jonathan just mentioned, there's new reporting this morning on the depletion of United States weapons stockpiles amid the Iran war. The Washington Post cites 3 officials familiar with the matter who say the U.S. military has lost roughly 25% of its Reaper drones. The aircraft, which are used to conduct surveillance and targeted strikes, have seen heavy use around the Strait of Hormuz, but are seen as easy targets for Iran's military and its regional proxies. The Reaper can cost between $30 and $50 million, with the potential taxpayer cost of recent losses coming in at $1.3 billion for that weapon system alone. The aircraft is just one in a long list of U.S. weapons and munitions drained by this war. Meanwhile, the Trump administration continues to emphasize economic pressure on Iran. Here's what Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told Newsmax last night.
Watch this space for more announcements coming next week, because we are going to apply measures like have never been seen in the history of economic isolation on a country. It will be a combination of economic isolation like the world has never seen before, and the continued blockade in the Strait of Hormuz that will keep anything from going in or out of the Iranian ports.
So glad he was all right after being put on the decoy plane.
Yeah. Didn't make the cut for the bakery truck.
Yeah, he didn't. So anyway, Jim Van Dyke, going back to the Armed Services Committee, what we always obsessed over all the time, Democrats and Republicans alike on the Armed Services Committee when it's there, the American military's ability to fight a two-front war. We always thought we had to have enough munitions, we had to have enough weapons, we had enough carrier groups. We had to be prepared to fight a two-front war. The United States has been fighting this one-front war. Mainly, we're the side that's shooting without them shooting back that much. And we're talking about Iran, not China, not Russia. We're talking about Iran, and yet we didn't even plan for this. We're running out of munitions. We've got troops on rotations that are going to crush morale, that's going to crush readiness, that's going to bleed into the next conflict. What's going on here?
Again, we've talked about this for a month. This was all foreseen and foreseeable. The president was warned by all of his advisors that all the scenarios we keep talking about on this show could and would likely happen, that the Iranian regime wouldn't just buckle, that it would fight back, that they're not motivated by worrying about economic sanctions. Their economy has already collapsed. So then when you go into this war and you send these wobbly signals about whether it's working or not working, imagine being the Secretary of Navy trying to figure out, okay, when do I have to rotate deployments? Imagine being the commander of that ship. One day it seems like it's done. The next day it seems like we'll be there forever. Then the obvious outgrowth of that is what you talked about at the top of the show. My dad loves the saying, prior planning prevents piss-poor products. Same thing with performance. And you're seeing it because there isn't a plan. There's no direction to give these. And he likes Hegseth. Yes, there's a lot of people around him who don't like the defense secretary. He likes him because he does not push back, because he defends everything that the president does, that he says it's always part of the plan, that he'll go after the press, that he'll purge people that don't look like him outside of the military, regardless of what their qualifications are. He's doing what he was asked to do. He likes it because he does not push back, because he defends.
Hello, this is DrPaulCottrell. We are live streaming on Rumble, YouTube, and my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Thank you for joining. We're going to go over retail data that came in softer than expected. It's bad news for retailers, but a sign that maybe the Federal Reserve will not raise rates. So there's this, inflation is going up a little bit, but sales are going down. Unemployment's going, or new job creation is less, and unemployment is rising up a little bit, but then in some cohort groups it's not. So the data is mixed. So what will the Federal Reserve do? Raise rates to fight inflation, or cut rates to help the job market and boost up sales, or just stay flat? Right now, the futures market for the S&P 500 is coming in at 7,828. I have a year-end target of 7,800. So be careful. Between 7,800 and 8,000 seems a little bit overbought, especially in tech. But that doesn't mean that the bubble can't continue to go a little bit more before it bursts. There was a little bit of a deflation of that bubble, AI bubble, last month, but now it's starting to re-inflate. So just be careful of that. Now, I've been watching SSG, which is a short ETF for semiconductors. Right now, NVIDIA is doing decently with its price action in the last couple days. That ETF, SSG, to short semiconductors. So for the ones that don't know this, you can long a industry or short the industry. If you want to short the industry, that means that you think that their stock prices are going to go down. So SSG is a short ETF for the semiconductors. It's trading at 11.22. It was trading as much as 15, 14, not that long ago. So now there's a new trading range at about 11 to about 12. So as the semiconductor industry starts to go up in price, these companies have some price action moving upward. You'll start to see SSG go down. But I still hold the thesis, and many people do, many hedge funds do, and GETTR does, we all hold the same thought process. OpenAI and Anthropic do not have viable business models to justify a high valuation. The money coming in is less than the money going out. And Anthropic decided to purchase a company that deals with simulating real-world physics, but they also have code to improve on efficiency to calculate these operations. Now, Anthropic buys this company, but that doesn't mean that Anthropic is a $1 trillion company. And I saw a news article, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, that was stating that maybe Anthropic, when it goes IPO, is going to hit $2 trillion. There is no way that Anthropic is worth $2 trillion. The same problem with SpaceX. It's all hype. It's all hype. Now, talking about SpaceX. Right now, SpaceX is approximately at 141 per share. So be careful with this Anthropic, OpenAI, IPOs, the circular financing that's going on with Oracle and NVIDIA and the hyperscalers and the different server farms, and BlackRock's involved and Goldman Sachs is involved. This reinflation of the AI bubble recently is going to set in motion the decline. But how long does it take? It's anyone's guess. It could be a quarter from now, 2 quarters from now, 3 quarters from now, 1 year from now. I think going a year out is a little too long. I suspect that smart money is going to start moving a little bit into safe havens. There is a grand strategy of rotation in terms of the S&P 500, where individuals are getting out of tech and moving into more defensives. Last year, the return on the S&P 500 was related to the Mag 7. This year, it's not so much. The increase in the S&P 500 isn't so much related to the Mag 7. So the exposure of the broader index to Mag 7 has declined over time, which is a good thing when the AI bubble bursts. But if it's really a once in a lifetime thing, then why are people, money managers, smart money, rotating into or rebalancing out of it? Maybe there's a problem. It has a little bit of a hint of Enron, has a little bit of a hint of Lehman, has a little bit of a hint of the dot-com bubble. Be careful when you start hearing circular financing and debt issuance. Now people would say, well, wait a minute. If Goldman Sachs is willing to help with the debt for NVIDIA, then this must be positive. Well, you got to remember, Goldman Sachs works both sides of the fence. They're going to help underwrite the debt and work with BlackRock. I think smart banks may be involved, but there are other companies involved. But they also have a trading side. And so as this debt is issued and backed by these different banks, NVIDIA has more money. And then all of a sudden, NVIDIA starts to bid up. Their stock price keeps on going up. And then everyone starts to moving into tech again. And so the traders at Goldman Sachs and the trading floor are going to be hitting buy. Because that's where the momentum is. And then the traders are waiting. They're making their money. They're waiting for NVIDIA to have a bad quarter, or there's a slowdown in server farm build out, or the IPO fails for Anthropic, something bad. And then they start hitting sell. So Goldman Sachs makes money on both sides of this. So be very careful. That's why I say that I have a year-end target of 7,800. It could go to 8,000, but if it does, just make sure you have about 10% in cash. You can be 90% invested in the S&P 500 or broad index and just ride it. And if it does sell off, if it goes to that 7,200 support level or 7,000 support level, buy. That's the reason why you have the cash on hand, to wait for it to happen. Now, one way to know when to buy is not just the price, but whenever there's a big sell-off, Tom Keene from Bloomberg has a special the night of the sell-off. All right, so the day of trading, there'll be a big sell-off, and then there'll be a special where they get their senior staff and they talk around a table and they start talking about the market and what's happening. That's when you buy. When you see that, that's when you buy. All right, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and help support the work that I do. I have great supplements that will help to slow down the aging process. These are supplements that I take every day to improve my health, slow down the aging process. Now, will you turn into an adolescent if you're like 50 years old? No, of course not. But if you follow my lead, you will get healthier. Your endocrine system will get better. Your immune system will get better. Your cardiovascular system will get better. Your blood glucose levels will get better. Your brain function will get better. Your digestive system will get better. You'll be able to have more vitality and longevity. It's really simple. It's really simple stuff. It's not, you don't have to get overly complex. Now, everybody's biochemistry is slightly different. Everyone has their own little issues. but it's about bringing down inflammation, soaking up free radicals, boosting up energy levels. That's the core of the whole concept. Now, of course, you have to build muscle and denser bone. But when you take this advice, you're slowing down the methylation of your genes. Well, if you're slowing down the methylation of your genes, that means you're stopping the epigenetic process of, quote, what we call aging. Now, another great way to take a look at aging is that it is a disease. It's a slow disease that's slowly happening to you. So if we approach it from that point of view, then let's try to understand where are the gate points of this aging process. And those gate points take place at around age 30 and 40, age around 65. Another gate point happens at around 72. Your different organ systems could be at different ages based on telomere length or the methylation. You could be 50 years old, but your brain could be 60 or 70 years old. Your heart could be 30 years old. Your lungs could be 40 years old. The point here is that different organ systems will have a different actual epigenetic age, a different telomeric age. Organ systems don't age based on the calendar, is my point. And so if you can create an environment local to those organ systems, you can help improve the tissues. And over time, what happens is you're actually getting slowly younger. It's a really simple concept, but you get into pharmacopoeia with all of the side effects and all that, you're not aging slower. You're either, at best, slowly mitigating the disease that you may have. But when you're on pharmacopoeia, you're going to have all these side effects that have these negative effects on the methylation of these different tissues. So it speeds up the aging process. So this is the reason why certain people shouldn't be on certain medication for too long. Now, of course, if they have a disease, you need to stabilize them, get them into homeostasis, but then you have to get them off of it. Perfect example. Let's say that you have problems with your blood glucose levels and you're type 2 diabetic now. Well, instead of being on metformin, instead of taking insulin, maybe you should slowly get off of that stuff. Yes, you have to stabilize it. You have to stabilize your body, but you can slowly get off of it by controlling your blood glucose levels, quote, naturally. You don't have to be on metformin. There are many nutraceuticals and homeopathic ways of doing it where it mimics the same, it acts like metformin. So why would you do that? Well, you have all these other side effects, especially when you get older and you're layering medications on top of each other. And the side effects actually are synergistic aspects to the side effects. It leads to further aging, telomeric aging, and methylation aging. Why would you do that? See, everyone's got their head up their ass. All you gotta do is keep the inflammation down, soak up those free radicals, boost up those energy levels. And when you do that, your tissues will perform better. Now, there are other things that you have to add to kind of supercharge that, but that's the premise. That's the key to this. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Now let's talk about the baseline, the very base of starting this process. Gut health is super important for your metabolism, for your immune system, for brain function, the way that your liver processes. So I have probiotics that are either in a powdered form or in a veggie cap form. All right, I prefer the powdered version because I just mix it with soft foods, but either one will work for you. Take it every day, and that gut biome is going to improve. What happens is your inflammation at the gut level goes down, your mucosal layer gets healthier and thicker, your IgA concentrations go up, so your immune system at the gut level goes up. The crypt is healthier within the gut, and it's tighter. The cells are tighter. And because the cells are tighter and the mucosal lining is healthier, you have less chance of leaky gut syndrome. And when you have less chance of leaky gut syndrome, you have less chance of developing food allergies. A lot of people don't realize if you have a poor gut, there's lots of inflammation, the mucosal layer starts to go down, your IgA concentrations go down, and all of a sudden that inflammation makes your tissue for your colon more permeable. And when it's more permeable, it'll get into the bloodstream. And those proteins from your food will get into the bloodstream, and then your body starts to create a way to fight it because it thinks it's foreign. So then all of a sudden, you start developing allergies. So there's a direct correlation here. Also, when you have a good gut biome, the processing of the food by the good bacteria within your gut also helps to improve your sleep pattern. If you start getting into the 3 to 5 cycles of deep sleep and REM sleep, you're consolidating your memory. That's really important. When you have lack of sleep chronically, you're not consolidating memory. Now, what do you think will happen to your hippocampus if you're not consolidating memory? It's going to shrink. So literally, if you improve your gut, you're improving the health of your neural connections. In addition, by improving your gut, you're going to be able, when you're getting to those 3 to 5 cycles of REM sleep and deep sleep, detoxify your central nervous system. Now, do you think that by detoxifying your central nervous system that you'll make your cells healthier? Yes. Because by detoxifying it, there's going to be less inflammation. When there's chronic inflammation at the neural level, what happens is that the proteins that the neuron makes get misfolded. When they misfold, especially if they have high beta sheet concentrations, will start to accumulate, stick together, coagulate. You know, it'll stick together. And when that happens, you're starting to build up these plaques called amyloidosis. Then all of a sudden the neuron doesn't function as well, and the myelin sheath starts to erode, and all of a sudden your brain doesn't work as well. And depending on where this is happening in the brain depends on what is happening to your body. If it's happening in a region where it's the prefrontal cortex, your decision making may be impaired. If it's happening in the occipital lobe, your vision may be impaired. If it's happening at the temporal lobe, your hearing may be impaired. It just depends on where this is happening. If it's happening, in a region where you're controlling your movement of your limbs, you may have coordination issues just because of the gut. So what you need to do is take the probiotics, take it every day, and it will help to improve your health. And it also helps with the skin. Poor gut health also can cause skin issues. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Use discount 5 to get $5 off. It's really simple. The link is in the description of this video. Click that link, go to my website, get the great products that I offer, and you will be able to get healthy. All right, with that, the market's going to be opening up soon here, so let's just switch over to Bloomberg as we wait for the market open.
Middle East and Africa, vibrant resources and high-yield investment opportunities abound. Join me on Horizons Middle East and Africa for the stories, newsmakers, and insights from this exciting region. Now weekdays, only on Bloomberg.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Haslinda Amin in Mumbai. This is Bloomberg.
This moment's away from the start of trade. This is Bloomberg Open Interest. I'm David Burr. Let's get a check.
The S&P 500 is trading at 7,805. VIX is very stable at 14. But I do think that by the month end, we may see a spike in the VIX to 19 or 22, somewhere in there. Euro is trading at 115. Japanese yen is trading at 159. There is news about the BOJ going to raise rates that is probably going to drive the yen stronger, maybe below 155 for a little while, and then probably will creep back up. So there's going to be another probably intervention in the market. Bitcoin's trading at just below 63,000. SpaceX is trading at 143.60. Natural gas is trading at 2.748. WTI is at 81.22. Now, let's talk about natural gas and oil. Oil and natural gas, but primarily oil, is heavily related to what's going on in the Middle East. And it is above that support level of 79.62 that I keep on talking about. If it stays above that support level, then we're going to have a trading range between this 79.62 and about 87, closer to the lower 80 handle. So, right now we're at 81.19. If we don't hear anything positive and ships aren't getting through the strait, oil's not getting through, we probably creep back up to $83, $84 a barrel. I don't think that's going to happen today, but we may see that on Monday. Now, natural gas is trading at 2.747. I do have, and I tell people this, I do have positions shorting natural gas, and I have a smaller longing position for natural gas as a hedge. I'm also shorting oil. Now, but the short on oil is not a large position. I do have a very large short position on natural gas. This is trading at 2.748. I think that natural gas fair value is around 2.5. But after August, typically natural gas starts to drift up. The question is, will our summer season, not the summer season, will our fall and winter season be above average in temperature? If it is above average in temperature, most likely natural gas will trend a little bit lower in relative price compared to previous years. So the trading range probably right now is around 2.65 to about 2.8. But as we move into September, October, I wouldn't be surprised if natural gas starts to trend up, and that trading range is going to be around 2.9 to 3.3. But right now, it's intraday since 8:20 a.m. has been trending down for natural gas. Gush is trading at 40.76. And DRIP is trading at 38.46. Those are ETFs to long energy or short energy, respectively. So that's the market right now. I want to listen into Bloomberg.
it doesn't terrify people because the only way they're getting that productivity and margins is because they're firing people. You need to see that, you need to see a marriage of use and still employment before people can feel really comfortable that there isn't a huge downside in the near term to this. But I also think that it's taking some time for companies to get their hands around how to use it, because people started firing a whole bunch of programmers. They went back and had to rehire some, because you do need an and with the technology. It's not always an or. And I think that finding where that's going to be is why it's hard to figure out where exactly the bubble is and when it's going to pop, because you can see that there's a lot of spending and a lot of enthusiasm, but it's hard to see how that plays out individually.
Let me posit something here and you can respond to it. I think that's what's most worrisome to me. You see companies making these kinds of decisions, particularly when it comes to personnel at a moment when I think everyone is admitting we're kind of fumbling through this in a way. It's a nascent technology. We don't know how it's going to affect the economy, how it's going to affect a variety of sectors, and yet you see companies taking steps to kind of, yes, incorporate it, kind of think of what the knock-on effects of that might be. How do you think about that? Just the way that the industry embraces a new technology like this, given so much uncertainty surrounding it and its efficacy?
I think everybody's looking for the best way to use it in their process as opposed to wholesale getting rid of people. And I think that first wave of getting rid of programmers, again, as I said, sort of has had some backlash, and you start to see people looking for people again. I think that everybody wants to use it themselves to make themselves more productive, because there is an enormous amount of what I would call legwork that can be done, but it still has to be checked, because you're still just going through what's already out there. It's just doing it faster. We always have to go back and analyze what we see, even though we didn't do some of that legwork. You want to check and make sure those pieces are correct, and a person needs to do that. And I think that that's where, in each individual industry, they're trying to figure out how that works the best. And I don't think that we have the answer to that yet. But that's where you're going to start to see more enthusiasm or less, depending on what happens.
On this hot summer day in the middle of August, where do you see opportunity at this point in time? Where are you looking in the market right now for opportunity?
Well, there have been a bunch of places that were sort of left behind, although they're left behind less now, right? Healthcare was sort of left behind for a little while, as were financials. The industrials were already part of this story because you were looking at the build out, as were the utilities. But there are places now where you're starting to see some, there's a lot of drug discovery. There's a lot of things that AI can help with that doesn't necessarily have to replace people, but can make people more productive and discover things faster. And I think that there are some of the instrumentation companies, we like Danaher, we like some of the areas there where the companies are being able to use this technology to further things and make it happen faster. It doesn't mean that we need less drugs. We just want to try to figure out how to get them better and faster. So I think that there's opportunity in a lot of areas there, and that's where companies and investors are looking.
We're pushing ahead here to consumer sentiment. Let me get the Sarah Hunt sentiment on the market here before I let you go. How are you feeling just generally about the state of the market and the economy today?
I think that right now in August, we're feeling pretty good about it. I think that if you get data points like we just saw on both retail sales and some of the other data that was a little bit mixed, it's going to be harder. The fall is always tricky because people are looking at, all of a sudden you start looking at 2027, which I can't believe I'm saying out loud already because it feels like 2026 went so fast. But people start looking ahead at the next year, and then you start to worry about whether or not that CapEx spend, again, it's not that people are not going to spend, but that rate of spending changes. When that second derivative turns negative, people start to get concerned about where valuations are. We're not quite there yet. That is something to look at as we go forward.
Sarah, great to see you. Sarah Hunt joining me here for the first half hour of the day here, first half hour of the show here as we get started the trading day. Sarah Hunt of Alpine Stocks is joining me here in New York. We're going to check on the stock market right now. Market's higher after that opening bell. Maybe I can look at some selected movers that are making moves here in the early morning of trading here. We'll have MOV on the terminal looking at what's gaining here. Tesla and Apple both up this morning. Alphabet as well. Alphabet under pressure a little earlier in the week. Here, Micron Technologies continue to talk about the AI trade in a, about 1% here. Put some laggards here if we could. The other side of the coin here, Broadcom down 2.6%, quarter six at 6 points down. Eli Lilly Applied Materials, they're lagging as well. Maybe we can look at some sectors too here. Again, just a few minutes into the start of the trading day on Wall Street, we see a lot of these sectors in the green here, including communication services, has been so much of our focus here over the course of this last week. Energy up higher as well, and then looking at sectors not doing as well. The financials down slightly this morning, not by much. Healthcare index, we were just talking about that, Sarah and I, it down about 75.75%. All right, coming up here, the NASDAQ 100 is less than 1% away from a bull market in the past month, just as strategists game out a potential AI bubble bursting. We're going to get into that next on Bloomberg Open Interest.
All right, before we go to that AI bubble bursting from Bloomberg, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the C60. C60 is a very potent antioxidant. Take a teaspoon a day every day, preferably on an empty stomach in the morning. You can get it in avocado oil, extra virgin olive oil, and an MCT coconut oil. But again, take it every day, teaspoon a day. You can get it in a 2 ounce, a 4 ounce, or an 8 ounce configuration. It is cheaper per ounce to get the higher ounce configuration. So you can save some money and use discount 5 on top of that. Now, by taking C60 every day, what's going to happen is you're going to soak up those free radicals and the health of your mitochondria will improve. So you're building more ATP. By soaking up those free radicals and boosting up those energy levels, the cell's going to perform better. C60 also helps to bring down inflammation and stress in those tissues. So your organ systems will perform better. Your immune system, your endocrine system will perform better. Your neurons will be healthier. You'll have positive neuroplasticity where your dendritic connections will improve. You'll have faster cognition, better memory over time. And at the vascular level, by soaking up those free radicals, you're reducing the concentrations of oxidized LDL. When you reduce the concentrations of oxidized LDL, you have less plaque formation. That means you're going to have better blood flow. When you have better blood flow, that's also going to help with the brain. Now, not just at the neuron level and helping that neuron, when you're soaking up those free radicals in the neuron, the neuron's healthier because there's less inflammation, less stress. So there's less misfolding of proteins and accumulation. And when you have less plaque buildup, less chances of early onset of dementia. So taking C60 is really important to keeping these different organ systems, these different tissues healthy. It also helps the basal layer for your skin. At the basal layer, your skin produces new skin cells. But if that basal layer is not healthy, your skin cells aren't healthy. C60 will help to improve that basal layer, and it stacks really well with resveratrol. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the C60. Make sure you click the link in the description to get to my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com.
Let's start overseas. Becker is really propelling the deal forward.
Yeah, the hope is this will open up new markets and provide some additional liquidity.
Of course, now they're going to have competitors. We got a big week coming up in politics.
Spring season's underway. We're going to get some key reports.
Everything you need to know before the markets open on Monday.
Bloomberg this weekend, bringing a little Bloomberg into your weekend routine. Buckle up.
It's time now for our top calls. Here's Bloomberg's Emma Palmer with some of the analyst action in focus on this Friday morning.
Thanks, David. Yes, we're looking at 3 consumer stocks today. Kicking it off with airlines, a bullish bet on Boeing. The airline is winning its strongest Wall Street backing since 2022. BNP Paribas says Boeing's post-COVID uncertainty is over, and Argus expects a meaningful ramp-up in production. Moving over to media, Fox is capturing a pair of upgrades from JP Morgan and Wells Fargo. JP Morgan likes the boost from World Cup viewership, a better outlook for political ads, and distribution strength at Tubi. Meanwhile, Wells Fargo says Fox's deal to buy Roku will create more financial muscle for spending. The shares are up about 4% this morning. And with an out on some home goods, Bernstein is upgrading online furniture store Wayfair to outperform. It thinks Wall Street's underestimating how well the business is trending and thinks sales can come in stronger than expected. Shares up a little bit this morning. Maybe some good news if you're doing a little home redecorating, David.
Indeed. Emma, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Well, optimism around the AI trade is also being met with caution as strategists at Citigroup and Bank of America game out a bubble playbook. A Citi analysis found that Philadelphia Semiconductor Index is in bubble land after it rose over 2 standard deviations above its long-term trend in real terms. Let's discuss Bloomberg Tech reporter Ryan Listelica. Ryan, great to have you with us once again. Let's pick up right there. Just the degree to which there are fears in this market right now of a bubble. We were talking about circular financing just a few minutes ago. What stands out to you when you look at the Philly stock index right now, semiconductor index right now?
Well, it seems like what these investment banks were really talking about was just how quickly we've seen the stocks recover. Obviously, it's done extremely well this year. I believe the second quarter of the year was its biggest ever quarterly gain. But since then, we really saw a pretty steep retracement that it is now clawing back some. And the scale of that, which has been supported by some positive fundamentals, including some of the earnings we got this earnings season, I think has some people cautious about, is it moving up too fast, too soon?
Is it a widely shared thing? Am I right to mark the moment here as we get a pair of these notes? Is there been kind of growing generalized concern about this, or is it still something that's kind of not really in the mainstream?
I would say the idea of a bubble is something that people talk about sort of in the abstract, and it's something we've been hearing about really for more than a year now. People concerned about, like, hey, are there a lot of parallels to the dot-com era in terms of the build-out of AI infrastructure? Or is there, parallel to the build-out of internet infrastructure 25 years ago? So that's always been sort of in the ether, but I don't think people are really, in mass calling for some kind of bubble that's expected to pop in the near term. Most people continue to say, even though things have really moved up a lot, the fundamentals remain pretty supportive. We are spending more growth, better profitability, and better ROI from some of this hyperscaler CapEx spending. So that is really part of it, but certainly people calling a bubble is not new.
Viewers will know I've been watching Applied Materials here over the course of the morning. I wanted to ask you about that company, kind of in line with what you were just saying, Ryan, which is, here's a company that seems to have done pretty well. The outlook for the future looks pretty good as well, and yet we see it down here 3% this morning. What explains that, just kind of the general sense that you're getting of why this company is down on this Friday?
One thing I would just note is that Applied Materials, I believe it had more than doubled year-to-date going into this report. So that's just an indication that expectations were quite elevated. Now, I think the report was pretty strong. I think it beat expectations on both the top and bottom line. The forecast was pretty strong. It is seeing a lot of tailwinds associated with artificial intelligence, including demand for memory-related chips. This is a company that is involved in building out the machines that are used to build out the chips. So it is seeing a lot of positive trends right there. So as far as this modest decline in the stock, following the year-to-date rally, I'm not sure people are too surprised by that.
Maybe I can close by asking about this Bloomberg report about the revenue run rate at OpenAI, $40 billion here, and just ask you to put that into some context. I mean, I think there's going to be a tendency here to kind of want to match that with what Anthropic's doing, how it's faring as both of these companies speak toward an IPO, and I gather there's some nuance there. Difficult to compare these two companies directly when it comes to that revenue metric. But what do you make of this news, and what does it tell us about the contours of that push to an IPO that we have here presumably in the months ahead?
Well, I know there has been a lot of caution about OpenAI and how much growth is it seeing? Is it able to meet the targets it's setting? And this really does have a lot of broader implications for the market because so much of the AI trade is tied to these big LLM providers like OpenAI, like Anthropic. So that OpenAI is seeing some better trends that's going to help reduce some of the concerns people have about its ability to monetize all of its AI services, its ability to pay for all the AI infrastructure it's building out. That will ease concerns about, going back to the whole bubble idea. If we start to see these big LLM providers really start to get on a stronger financial footing, I think that's going to have positive implications across the space.
Ryan, great to talk with you as always. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend. That's Bloomberg's Ryan Costello joining us from Chicago. Coming up, we are talking commodities with portfolio manager Doug Daly. How to play the trade through ETFs. That is coming up next here on Bloomberg Open Interest on Bloomberg Television.
Another way to play the trade through ETFs for the S&P 500 is to take a look at SSO and SDS. SSO is trading at 72.52. That's longing the S&P 500, and SDS is shorting it. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the structural nail silver lozenges. You can get it in Manuka honey and also in orange splash. These structural nail silver lozenges will help to neutralize and protect that oral pharynx. Perfect for the cold season and perfect for the allergy season. Also, when you're cleaning around the house, the basement, the garage, working outside in the yard, take some of these structural nail silver lozenges so you're neutralizing and protecting that oral pharynx. I also have olive leaf extract. Olive leaf extract is dual purpose. It's going to bring down inflammation and help you to control your lipid profile. It helps to bring down LDL levels and increase your HDL levels. Olive leaf extract helps with your immune system and helps with your cardiovascular system. So please go to my store and get the olive leaf extract. This is something you should be taking every day to improve that immune system and help with your cardiovascular system. Use discount 5, get $5 off. It's all caps, discount 5. Go to my store, the Iranian-studio-Reykjavik.com. The link is in the description. We're going to listen to live now about Iran attacks UAE-linked ships in the Strait of Hormuz. This was published approximately an hour ago.
All right, and as we approach the top of the hour here, my name is Josh Breslow, and the time is 6:57 on the East Coast and 3:57 on the West Coast. You can see right there on the right-hand side of your screen a live look over the Strait of Hormuz at this hour, and of course, we looked into the latest here on the U.S.-Iran conflict. I'm going to pop this up on your screen to give you a look as Bahrain is condemning a, quote, Iranian terrorist attack in the Strait of Hormuz on 2 ships linked to the United Arab Emirates. This right here from Iran International English, as they say, Bahrain condemned an Iranian attack on 2 tankers belonging to the United Arab Emirates ADNOC as they crossed the strait, calling it a serious threat to regional security and maritime navigation. Bahrain's foreign ministry today describing the incident as a, quote, Iranian terrorist attack and said it violated international law and rules governing freedom of navigation. The ministry expressed full solidarity with the UAE and said it supported measures taken by Abu Dhabi to protect its security and its vital interests. And again, as we take a live look over the Strait of Hormuz coming in from marine traffic here, the U.S. says it could maintain a naval blockade of Iran indefinitely and would ratchet up economic pressure on Iran as ceasefire talks have seemingly stalled overall. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent now saying the U.S. is preparing to impose measures on Iran that are, quote, unprecedented in the history of a country's economic isolation. So, again, so much to discuss here. So I do want to bring in Don Brown, former Pentagon official, Navy JAG officer, and U.S. federal prosecutor. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Josh, thank you for having me.
My meeting notes went from this to this after I started using granola. I'm in sales and take 10 plus calls a day, so it's really important that my meeting notes are actually useful after each call. I went to see if there was a better option than my old note taker, and I stumbled across granola. During the meeting, I just jotted a few notes down in granola like I normally would. Then after the call, I took what I wrote and turned it into a clean recap from the meeting, not a wall of bullet points or a transcript of the call, just this stuff.
Josh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I want to start by talking to you kind of overall as we look at the situation with Iran once again attacking those ships in the Strait of Hormuz. We're talking 2 ships that are linked to the United Arab Emirates. What does all of that say about where things stand and the fact that we are getting these other countries there that are condemning Iran for these attacks?
Well, Josh, it's a positive sign that those Sunni neighbors, they're Sunni Islamic countries in the Persian Gulf region, are condemning these attacks. Bahrain did. The British Maritime Trade Agency reported perhaps another tanker was hit by a drone within the last 24 hours. The big picture, though, is that while these attacks have taken place, we are getting some movement coming through the Strait of Hormuz in terms of oil being shipped. In fact, Chris Wright, the Secretary of Energy, reported just a couple of days ago that we're getting about 9 million barrels out of there and another 6 million coming largely across that transcontinental pipeline that the Saudis have running from east to west. And so we're up to about 15 million barrels coming out for the last week, which is about 75% of the maximum flow coming out of the Persian Gulf. So that is a positive sign. But these attacks have got to stop. Fortunately, those tankers appear to make it through. That's good. But, you know, as the president says, nobody wants $1 billion ship to be subject to attack coming through these straits. And the big thing I've been watching is that Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is the strategic choke point between the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The Houthi rebels attacked apparently a cargo ship, a Tanzanian cargo ship a couple of days ago, and if that strait gets closed, you better watch out for gas prices. But right now we're in a cycle and it needs to be broken at some point for sure.
And I talked about this kind of off the top as I was introing you here, but I-24 News English and several outlets reporting this as a result of the comments by U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who announced that the U.S. is preparing to impose measures on Iran, quote, unprecedented in the history of a country's economic isolation. What can we kind of gauge from that? Because that almost says, look, the talks have stalled, so we need to find something else that we can do to punish Iran.
Well, the talks have stalled, and technically this MOU expired Sunday the 17th. You know, it's a 60-day MOU. Both sides have declared it's been dead in the water. You know, within the last week or so, or 2 weeks really, the military action has moved largely from large airstrikes to naval enforcement. But it's clear that we're in a cycle, Josh, and something has to happen. And from the American perspective, I'd rather see sanctions turned up more, really steeply than run the risk of the war escalating. And so I think it's a step in the positive direction from the American side. The Iranians, if they'll respond to anything, it's going to be to cutting off their money supply, which we've done a pretty decent job already. But it'll be interesting to see what the specifics are the Secretary is proposing.
And right here, you are taking that live look at the Strait of Hormuz. Once again, this is coming in from marine traffic, where you can see, as we've seen for a while, not a whole lot of movement. We also heard from Pete Hegseth, and he said that the U.S. could, quote unquote, indefinitely maintain that naval blockade of Iran. We know that essentially Iran and the IRGC say that they are in charge of the Strait of Hormuz, and then you have President Trump saying, no, it's the U.S. So who is in control, and what would a full blockade there of Iran indefinitely really mean?
Well, first off, we're getting movement through the strait. Again, according to the Secretary of Energy, 9 million barrels a day is the moving average over the last several days. The ordinary capacity is 20 million, but we're moving a lot of that oil, the Saudis are, through pipeline. The U.S. is primarily in control of it, but the problem with the Strait of Hormuz is that we're in a period, Josh, of asymmetric warfare. What I mean by that is, of course, you have cheap but destructive weapons being used by a lesser military, opponent, such as $30,000 drones, to harass shipping coming through there. It appears that we have pretty much cleared the mines out of that strait. Mines are even more dangerous than drones in many ways, because the mine will break a ship in half if you hit it the wrong way. And so while we are primarily in control of it, we aren't. We're dealing with pesky, attacks from these drones and these mines and things of this nature that really is going to spook the international oil markets. And that's the problem we've got.
One thing that's been talked about, I would say a lot over the past several months, is whether or not there would be ground troops from the U.S. that go into Iran. Iran issuing a threat saying earlier on this week that if the U.S. were to send any kind of troops, it wouldn't end well. So is there any world where the U.S. actually sends troops onto the ground there in Iran as the conflict continues?
Well, first off, Iran and its rhetorical hot air remind me of Baghdad Bob from the Iraqi war 20, 30 years ago, however long it's been. You can't really trust what they're saying. The issue is whether the president wants to do that. I don't think the country wants any sort of massive, ground war at all. And I don't think the president wants to do that either. But I do think that, we're going to have a combination of finding a way to step up the military ferocity of the campaign, something short of ground troops, while at the same time perhaps ratcheting up economic sanctions as the Secretary of the Treasury was talking about this week. I don't think we're going to see a massive ground invasion. America doesn't want another forever war. And the difference between what's happened here, even though we're ready to see it end, but it's, we're into March, April, May, June, July. We're into the fourth month or so. There have been no ground troops. We've lost some Americans. It's not been a massive loss of life, but one life is too much. But I don't foresee that happening, Scott. I just don't. You might see special forces go in, but you can't trust the Iranians. And the people that were sort of in, you've almost got to take that government out in order to accomplish our objectives here. And it would take ground troops to do that. I don't think we're going to see it.
And there's been a lot of information, you just touched on this, but a lot of hot air, so to speak, that's coming from Iranian officials there, as there's questions about who is actually in charge there in Iran. And we have this post coming in from U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, as they try to clarify some of that false information that's out there. And I want to read this. I know the type is very, very small, but the claim, over the past 48 hours, multiple media outlets have reported several false claims related to the USS Abraham Lincoln's deployment to the Middle East. One report alleged 7 sailors died in a brawl aboard the aircraft carrier, and others have recently suggested a spike in suicidal ideations. These reports are false. The fact, USS Abraham Lincoln has maintained among the highest crew enlistment rates, 84.4% of all aircraft carriers in the U.S. Navy. The sailors and Marines of the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group remain resilient and resolved after more than 260 days at sea, 10,000 aircraft flights, and 1.5 million pounds of ordnance expended. No service members aboard the aircraft carrier have died, and the one sailor who fell overboard August 3rd was quickly and safely recovered. The rampant misreporting on Abraham Lincoln's historic deployment is a disservice to our men and women in uniform and their loved ones. How important is it for the Pentagon to get ahead of some of these false reports that are out there, whether they're coming from Iran or different agencies that are reporting them via sources?
Yes, Josh, I thought they did a pretty good job there of debunking those rumors pretty quickly. You remember USS Abraham Lincoln's Nimitz-class carrier, it has a full complement between the air crew and the ship's crew of about 5,000. So it's like a city, on steel, out there enforcing American naval power. You can't, if something like that happened, it'd be hard to stifle it up. I'm confident that CENTCOM's debunking of these theories is accurate, but this appears to be, again, propaganda stuff floating out there to try to make it appear as if, our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines are suddenly, either depressed or not into following the orders of their superiors. It seems to be a propagandist tool, but CENTCOM did a good job of tamping it down. It's very difficult sometimes in this internet age or so. Everybody and their brother's got a laptop and rumors can get started so quickly, but I think they did an effective job here. I have no reason to believe those reports are accurate.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of questions about what is accurate, what is that accurate information versus some of the fiction that we're hearing. Now, as we look at the Strait of Hormuz one more time, this has become a sticking point because if you think about it, off the top of Operation Epic Fury, there was so much discussion about the nuclear program, Iran's nuclear program, and preventing them from ever having a nuclear weapon. But does it seem almost as if everything's kind of focused now on the Strait of Hormuz? What are your thoughts?
Josh, you make a good point. There's in economics, it's about macroeconomics and microeconomics. The immediate concern right now is international shipping.
New data came out with UMISH 1-year inflation expectation to be 4.3 versus 4.2. So inflation expectations are higher. The consumer sentiment falls to 51. Estimate was 55.
It doesn't mean that Iran's nuclear capabilities are not a major concern. They certainly are. It's a dangerous situation. But you want, the world's economy and the flow of this oil supply is crucial. The Iranians are claiming they want to come in and put a tax and control the strait. That is a violation of all norm of international law. We have a number of strategic choke points around the world. There's the Strait of Hormuz, the Bosphorus there in Turkey, the Strait of Malacca, the Taiwan Strait. Every one of these straits is considered to be international territory. We send our Navy through these straits to maintain, international shipping lanes. And so you're right. In the short term, the focus is on that strait because the world's oil prices and our own economy here in the United States depends on it to a large degree.
All right, Don Brown, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, helping to break down all the latest developments out of there. Again, we only talked about a small portion because there's so much going on.
The United States baseless claims that vessels are transiting the Strait of Hormuz normally, which demonstrate the desperation and helplessness of the country's military, are nothing but falsehoods and lies. The Strait of Hormuz remains under the full management and control of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Iran claiming it has complete control over the strait, really? This comes as Iran's foreign minister issues a warning saying, quote, the U.S. has long miscalculated due to intelligence failures, Case in point, the war in Iran. Now an even bigger miscalculation on the Strait of Hormuz. The tough talk comes after President Trump said the U.S. has, quote, total control of the waterway and thinks we will keep it. Retired four-star General Jack Keane is here to react. He's also a senior strategic analyst and chairman of the Institute of Study of War. General, who's right?
Well, both of them have something to say about this, in my judgment, okay? So let's unpack it a little bit so our audience can understand. Obviously, we have a naval blockade in, and nothing going to an Iranian port or coming out of an Iranian port is able to take place. We've turned around 55 ships, we've disabled 3, and we've boarded 2. So that is control. There's no doubt about that in terms of that specific trafficking, and that's sizable in of itself. The second thing the United States is doing, we have successfully demined more than one route in the Straits of Hormuz, and obviously that has long-term implications itself. And then we're transiting ships along the southern route off the coast of Oman, and CENTCOM is doing that. Transponders are normally off, that's, revealing their location, usually done at night, and we're also protecting them in that transit. And those transits are safely done and completed. And obviously those numbers have gradually increased into the double-digit number of ships. So that's the reality there in terms of what the United States is controlling. So what does the Iranians actually control? What they're doing is it's less about control, and it's more about influencing shipbuilders. Through intimidation and coercion, there's still a significant number of ship owners and ship captains, obviously, who are in the region, who do not want to transit the straits because of the threats from Iran. And that threat is real, and it's in their heads, certainly. Now, they know they can pass through the southern route. We've demonstrated they're doing safely, but in their minds, there's still too much risk. So it's less about control that Iran is claiming. It's more about influence and the threat of disrupting the Straits of Hormuz.
So they
that,
say,
I think,
yeah,
is kind of the difference.
The Secretary of Energy came out yesterday and told Brett Baer, you were on the show 2 days ago, he was on yesterday, they have an average of 8 to 9 million barrels of oil per day are currently moving through the strait. That's what they prompted the Iranians to answer that. We prefer 20 million barrels, but they said we're moving it through. And that was, we have said we are moving it through without a lot of fanfare. So it shows that there's something happening there. General, right now in this holding pattern, the Iranians feel they have the advantage. The president feels he has the advantage. Who do you think has the advantage?
Well, a couple things. Well, I do think the United States does, for a fact. But the truth is, what the Iranians did in taking charge of the straits in terms of disrupting it and influencing it on March the 2nd, right after we began the war on February the 28th, had impact. Obviously, we went to a ceasefire on April the 7th. For what reason? To negotiate with the Iranians over opening the Straits of Hormuz. They initiated that talk. Why? Because they wanted the war to stop. And has the war restarted in any consequential way? No. So did they achieve their goal in doing that? Yes. And we moved into a diplomatic phase, and we're still in it 4 months later. And that's the reality. The president's frustrated by that phase because, he's learned the Iranians lie, they cheat, you can't deal with them, they're crazy. These are the president's conclusions about that diplomatic phase. And we're applying increased economic pressure, what Secretary Besson is doing, in epic economic fury is really significant. And, the details of that, I think they'll reveal more of it. And that, when you add it on to the blockade, is quite dramatic. But no one knows if that's going to force the Iranians to take a knee here or not. I don't even think the Iranians know. I think what the Iranians want to do is resist all of that. They don't care about the suffering of their people. They believe time is on their side, and they'll ride this thing out as best they can. I believe that is their intention number one. Their intention number two, as we get closer to the midterms, is likely to increase violent and aggressive activity, believing that the administration will not react to it in any consequential way because it'll drive up oil prices prior to the election. That would be a fundamental miscalculation on their part once again, because the president has lots of tools in his hands here, and he can retaliate and likely would very aggressively retaliate regardless of the midterm elections. That is a lever, obviously, we have. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, we watch things change on a regular basis. Things can change at a drop of a hat, especially if there's some violence directed at our bases in the region. General Jack Keane, thanks so much.
Yeah, great talking to Brian. Have a wonderful.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox 1.
Whoa.
What's that?
I just built a budgeting app in Base 44.
Guys, you just built an app.
Impossible. You can get code. Interesting. Can it generate reports?
It can now.
Nice.
So you're saying we can all build apps now?
Yeah.
I'm on lunch. I gotta make a
Right. Just built an inventory tracker.
Protein calculator. Look there at
A workflow manager.
Tracks who still owes for the group lunch.
Trash duty schedule.
There's no one seems to care.
I just created a goal tracking system.
Because
Are you going to campaign with President Trump?
Yeah, I'm expecting to see him very shortly in New York. I spoke to him 3 times last week. He is really excited about my campaign because he sees that we really have an opportunity here to make this state red and to put it back out of its death spiral, create economic development, prosperity, and make people happy again.
That was Maria speaking with New York gubernatorial candidate Bruce Blakeman weeks ago on this program, and now the plan to get President Trump on the campaign trail with him. The president will be on Long Island, New York today to campaign as Blakeman is making New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani a central target of that campaign. The mayor, meanwhile, backing Governor Kathy Hochul for re-election. Look at this. New Siena poll shows Blakeman cutting Hochul's lead to just 10 points. Down from a 20-point lead back in June. Blakeman also telling Maria about his confidence ahead of November. Watch this.
I can guarantee you one thing, Maria. On January 1st, I will be sworn in as the next governor of the state of New York. People are miserable in New York State. Nobody likes Kathy Hochul. She's the worst governor in America. We have economic stagnation. We are number 50 in economic development. We are number 1 on taxing our own people. We spent $11 billion on illegal migrants who aren't New Yorkers. That's New York taxpayer money that's being spent on people that don't even belong here. She doesn't back the blue. It's time to fire Kathy Hochul, get back to good old-fashioned economic development principles of capitalism, increase jobs, have better paying jobs, better wages, work with organized labor to produce more jobs with an apprentice program in our community colleges, cut taxes, cut electric bills, and create prosperity. I am now winning in all of the contested congressional districts. I'm either winning or I'm tied with her. This is a horse race that I'm going to win because people don't like Kathy Hochul's policies. I'm ready to support my record of achievement in a county larger than 8 states with 110,000 more Democrats that I won in the last election by a landslide of 12 points.
He's got my vote. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the ashwagandha root. This will help to control your cortisol levels and your blood glucose levels. When you do that, you're helping with your cardiovascular health and your immune system. Zeolite will help to detoxify your body. Take 3 small drops underneath your tongue, drink filtered water, do that daily, and it'll bind to heavy metals, toxins, and chemicals and allow you to excrete them out within 6 to 8 hours. If you want to do a heavier detox, take 5 to 10 small drops underneath your tongue each day, drink the filtered water, do that until the bottle's done, do that once a year. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. All right, we're going to listen to the UNISH data that just came out for inflation expectations.
Retail sales unexpectedly weak for the month of July. And now we're getting another picture of how consumers are feeling right now. And the University of Michigan Sentiment Index coming in at 51, that is an unexpected decline. People had, the economists out there had anticipated it to stay relatively level to the previous one's 55.2. Let's bring in Joanne Shu. She's University of Michigan Surveys of Consumers Director, joining us from Ann Arbor. So Joanne, just give us the lay of the land here with this unexpected decline in the sentiment reading for the month of August.
Absolutely. So consumers are feeling less optimistic about the economy. This stems 2 consecutive months of pretty sizable increases. We didn't see much movement on personal finances, but expectations for business conditions, both in the short and the long run, really deteriorated this month. Consumers are quite worried about potential weakness in the economy ahead.
So anything in particular? Because I think we've had a lot of fluctuations on energy prices. So, consumers see that at the gas pump. But anything in particular? Because the employment environment still seems pretty strong.
When we ask people about labor market expectations, those are pretty flat. Those haven't changed all year, really. So at this point, what it looks like consumers are reacting to is not only gasoline prices, which did tick up in the last few weeks, but also this general concern that continued conflict in the Middle East, the continued closure of the Strait of Hormuz could have knock-on effects on business conditions going forward. And consumers are still expecting substantial inflation, at least in the year ahead. So there is general concern that these constraints, shipping constraints, supply constraints, could spill over to other parts of the economy going forward.
Yeah, it's definitely the inflation expectations that I'd like to hear more on, especially for the year ahead. We're looking at a 4.3% increase for the 1-year outlook. For the 5 to 10-year outlook, we're looking at 3.3%, which is steady with what we saw in July. How much of this is tied to gas prices? When we see gas prices come down, these inflation expectations tend to follow.
We do see a decent amount of movement in particularly short-run inflation expectations that is connected to gas prices, which makes sense because that is the one good where the price tags are visible to everyone on the street 24 hours a day. So that shouldn't really be that much of a surprise. What's interesting is that consumers are really starting to worry, or have been worried for the last few months, that this increase in gas prices could spread beyond gas prices, but to goods overall, and that would lead to higher inflation across the board. Consumers are worried that it's not just gas prices and that business conditions could be affected going forward.
Joanne, in the past, some of the sentiment data has been impacted or been influenced by political affiliation. Is that playing into this data point at all?
The decrease that we saw in sentiment between July and August was seen across the political spectrum. So Democrats had lower sentiment than last month, independents, and as did Republicans, who were actually the ones who exhibited the largest decrease between last month and this month. And in fact, Republicans right now are at their lowest levels of sentiment since the last presidential election. So really, this is a pretty broad-based decrease in this early month reading in August. Beyond the political spectrum, the groups that also had really large declines between last month and this month were older Americans, less educated Americans, and lower income Americans. These are all groups that are going to be more sensitive to reductions in their purchasing power because they don't have large buffers of say, stock wealth that will help cushion them through an increase in the cost of living.
Joanne, I'm increasingly seeing the word stagflation come up in different economists or analysts' remarks on the state of the economy. Is there anything in the data, in the report that you guys just published that kind of backs that idea up, at least the perception of it among consumers, the idea that inflation will stay elevated, but the economy is stagnating, is slowing down?
What we see in the data is that consumers perceive some weakness among multiple dimensions of the economy. Not only are they expecting inflation to increase and to stay high, they are also expecting relatively weak labor markets. The key thing, though, is with labor market expectations, Those had a major decline about a little over a year ago amid tariff developments, and they just haven't recovered. So this isn't really a new thing, this anticipated weakness in labor markets. But overall, consumers are seeing weakness both in terms of labor markets as well as the negative risks, unfavorable risks to inflation. But when you ask them which one is the bigger problem for the economy, amid tariff developments, and they just haven't recovered. So this isn't really. They're much more likely to name inflation and unemployment.
Joanne, thanks so much. Appreciate it. As always, Joanne Shu, Surveys of Consumers Director at the University of Michigan. So we get the retail sales data here.
All right, what we're going to do is go to CNN talking about the sailor issue with USS Abraham Lincoln. Before we do, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the turmeric. Turmeric will soak up free radicals and bring down inflammation. Lignans soaks up free radicals, brings down inflammation. Now, you can stack these together also with the ashwagandha root, and that is a very powerful stack to help with the immune system, the endocrine system, and the cardiovascular system, and brain function. It's really important to keep inflammation down, to keep those neurons healthy. So please go to my store, get the turmeric and the lignans and the ashwagandha. Another great supplement to take is Goodnight Formula. Goodnight Formula has tryptophan, melatonin, GABA, and passion flower. It will allow you to get into 3 to 5 cycles of REM sleep and deep sleep, so you're detoxifying your central nervous system, consolidating memory. You'll be well rested, and when you do that regularly, you're going to have better brain function. You're going to be slowing down the aging process. Yes, getting those 3 to 5 cycles of REM sleep and deep sleep is super important to maintain those neuron connections and the health of your hippocampus. Super important. So please go to my store and get the Goodnight Formula. Take it before you go to bed. Use discount 5, you get $5 off. Go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com.
A U.S. official told CNN that the USS George Washington carrier group is headed to the region to replace another carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln. That follows concerns about deteriorating living conditions and worsening mental health among its crew. The Lincoln has spent more than 250 days and counting on its current deployment. One Democratic senator says the vessel set a modern-day record for sailing without a port call. During that time, there were reports of crew members trying to jump overboard and about horrid living conditions on the vessel. Joining me now, retired U.S. Air Force Colonel and CNN military analyst Cedric Layton. Colonel, a pleasure having you join us to talk about this because I have a suspicion you may have exactly the kind of experience and perspective to help us understand this. So we have these reports, not just of the overboard sailor, but of the conditions on the Lincoln that sailors are dealing with. Shortages of items like soap, not the most hearty of meals, mold in the showers, et cetera, that I think would make even a short stint at sea unpleasant, right? Much less 250 plus days. And that's not to mention the actual job that these service members are tasked with focusing on. Give us an idea of the impacts of these conditions and if there is such a thing as a deployment being too long.
Yeah, Brian, it's great to be with you. Well, there's so many aspects to this. I had the honor of serving with the Navy for a deployment at sea during my career, and I spent just 30 days. So if you can imagine 250 days versus 30 days, I definitely feel for the sailors. But during that time, we also had plumbing issues. We had, water that, flooded out the toilets, and there was also an issue with the showers. So the conditions were not pleasant. They were definitely not what is being reported, for the USS Abraham Lincoln, but it definitely was something that impacted the quality of the deployment and really the ability to carry out your job in very confined quarters and with limited access to communications capabilities and the types of things we kind of take for granted in everyday life. But it was definitely an experience of a lifetime. But it was also an experience where there were certain hardships that you may not take into account if you're not used to deployments at sea.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Colonel, addressing some of these reports while talking to reporters in Panama. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Completely misread. The results are in. Commotion Voice AI is the clear winner in the latest independent blind benchmark. Tested not in demo environments, but under real-world conditions, Commotion outperformed other leading voice.
Completely misrepresented. Listen, we make sure that every ship, every crew, every captain has everything we can provide them at every single moment. Some deployments are longer than others, and I have more respect and gratitude for those sailors than anybody.
All right, so a couple of things to unpack there. One, him saying everything that can be provided is provided. That's not the same as saying we give them everything they need. And two, it's well documented at this point that Secretary Hegseth has been pushing for this warrior culture. Is that a culture that allows for service members to actually admit when they've reached a breaking point where it doesn't have to get filtered through family members?
Yeah, so that taking the second part first, I would say that the warrior culture ethos that Secretary Hegseth is trying to impart on the Department of Defense, that may conflict with the idea that the services that the Navy provides or that other services, military services provide to their members are really there to protect them both psychologically as well as physically. So one of the key things to remember in any type of deployment, whether it's with the Navy, with the Army, with the Air Force, or the Marine Corps, or the Space Force, it really is based on the ability of people to protect each other. You know, you fight for your buddy, basically. You know, you fight for the guy next to you in the foxhole is the kind of the old adage here. And the ability of teams to work together becomes a paramount thing when it comes to these kinds of deployments, because you really have to depend on each other when you're out at sea or when you're in a remote location, and that's basically what you're dealing with here. The Navy has a unique culture, it has unique traditions. The warrior ethos that Secretary Hegseth talks about, there's a certain tough guy image associated with that. The issue, though, is this: even tough guys need help, and the ability of people to get help, no matter what their gender, no matter what their situation, is really something that the modern military has gotten much better at. You saw like the service or therapy dog that Pamela Brown had in her report on the Lincoln. That's the kind of thing that's a more modern, more innovative approach. And that is really more in keeping with the kind of warrior culture that you want to instill. You want to instill a culture of teamwork. And frankly, the wars of the present and the wars of the future are going to be ones in which the mental ability and the mental and psychological health of the people involved is going to be much more important than almost any other factor in the ability of the unit to become a cohesive whole. And that's what you want. You want a cohesive whole that can carry out the mission.
And Colonel, we have just about a minute left. So this other carrier group, the USS George Washington, is on its way to the Middle East to relieve the Lincoln. A U.S. official has said this was pre-planned before these reports. But the length of the time the Lincoln's been at sea without a port call, setting a modern-day record, according to Senator Blumenthal. One of the lawmakers wanting some answers. What could those lawmakers actually accomplish here in this moment, if anything, by asking questions about this deployment, especially knowing that change is already on the way with this new carrier?
Yeah, so what they really should be looking at is the kinds of lessons learned that we can take from this. For example, you don't want food to run out. You don't want sailors on board a ship like the Lincoln to have issues getting fruits and vegetables. Back in the age of exploration, you had the issue of scurvy, and that kind of vitamin deficiency disease is something that really had an impact on sailors at that time in history, and you don't want to repeat those kinds of things. We are supposed to be much more forward-thinking when it comes to deployments and the ability of us to maintain our health in remote environments, and that is really something that they should look at. The supply efforts, the ability of ships like this to actually make port calls, to kind of normalize the routine. All of those things become important, and those are the types of questions that the senators and congressmen should be asking about.
And joining me now from Honolulu, Hawaii, is retired U.S. Navy Captain Carl Schuster. He's the former Director of Operations
at the U.S. Pacific Command's Joint Intelligence Center Pacific. Captain, great to see you. You are a veteran with decades in the Navy. What's your initial reaction when you hear that any ship has been at sea for more than 250 days?
I think
It felt like the bureaucracy Olympics. I had to cram a year's worth of insurance calls and doctor's appointments into one afternoon. But then, nice AI.
I think it's exceptionally difficult for the crew. I never did more than 90 days at sea, and I can tell you the minute you pass the 60-day mark, you're feeling tired of the deployment. It's not unusual. Certainly in my day, we had one or two guys try to jump overboard at about the 50 to 60-day mark. Being at sea on a carrier, particularly in a conflict situation, it's very intense. It places a very heavy psychological stress on you and physical, particularly for the guys in the propulsion spaces and the guys on the flight deck. Their work is very intense, very hard, and very stressful, and like in some cases, very dangerous. And everyone eventually reaches a breaking point. So we shouldn't condemn these guys. We should thank them for their service and give them all the help we can to get through the stress and situations they've felt. I'm glad to hear a carrier is going out there to replace the aid. In a perfect world, I would have sooner about 90 days earlier, but we have requirements these days exceed the number of carriers that we have. And so the human element of the Navy is paying for those decisions from a decade ago. Also, there are no good ports to visit in that area. You can't go into Djibouti, it's a good place, but it's within drone and missile range of the Houthis. You can't pull into Dubai because you're within drone and missile range of the Iranians. So the nearest safe port is Mumbai. And while I've never been there, I've heard good things about it, but it's about 4 days steaming away and 4 days to come back. So we face difficult choices, and the crew is paying the price for that. I think we'll be glad to have them go home, and it'll be great to see them replaced and get some relief, if you will.
It's a good point. You mentioned Dubai. I've literally seen and been on board a U.S. aircraft carrier that made a port visit there in the past, and clearly within range of the Iranian drones and missiles. But I want to ask about these most frightening reports that you mentioned, that you have seen and heard of suicide attempts in decades past, where service personnel try to throw themselves overboard. What are the realities of mental health in the Navy, and particularly aboard ships where sailors and Marines are far from their families for months and months and months at a time?
It's particularly stressful, and in my day, we were somewhat lucky in a way, in that we grew up in a society where you were surrounded by friends and shipmates, so you were accustomed to having almost a social network around you. Today's young people are more isolated psychologically, and so that natural support network doesn't exist, or it's not as great. We have chaplains, we have senior enlisted people and mid-level enlisted people who track these guys, talk to them. But let's face it, 200 days is a period longer than that we've seen since World War II. In my day, a 68-day deployment, 68 days continuously at sea was considered stressful. We had a couple of ships do 90, but we never had anyone do 200. And if you're down in the propulsion spaces, working 12, 14 hours a day, you don't see the sun. And so you're very dependent on your relationship with those around you, your interactions, and you increasingly feel isolated. So even minor things become a major issue over time. And as I said, each of us reaches a saturation, a breaking point at some time. The handful of sailors that this has happened to, clearly it reached their breaking point. In my view, we ought to rotate people off every 90 days or so. And if you can't remove the ship, then maybe find people to put on the ship to replace those you take off and send somewhere to kind of decompress, if you will. Of course, that's logistically complicated and expensive.
Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the magnesium and zinc. This will boost up your immune system and help with brain function. Another great neural stack, clarity factor. By taking clarity factor, you're going to be able to get rid of that brain fog. You're going to be able to concentrate on your tasks. And over time, you're going to have that positive neuroplasticity to link up your different neurons. You'll have better cognition. You'll think faster. You'll have better memory. Clarity factor is something you should be taking every day for improving your brain function. And if you're 40 years of age or older, take vitamin B complex. The first 4 B vitamins helps with the electron transport chain to boost up ATP so you have more energy. Vitamin B complex revs up the cellular metabolism, and vitamin B complex through vitamin B12 helps protect neurons. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Use discount 5 to save some money. The S&P 500 is starting to sell off now. It's at 7,791. It was trading above 7,800. VIX is at 14.60. Oil is trading at 81.50, and natural gas is trading at 2.774. All right, let's listen into China's industrial overcapacity.
Renewables are transforming the grid, but they can't do it alone. We need an integrated approach, which means that generation, storage, infrastructure, and power management must work together as one.
China's industrial overcapacity is putting growing pressure on economies worldwide, and the world may be nearing its breaking point. Could it, China, trigger a global economic crisis? That is one topic of Michael Furman's latest piece, published yesterday by Foreign Affairs magazine. And Ambassador Michael Furman joins us now. He's the president of the Council on Foreign Relations and former U.S. Trade Representative as well. And Ambassador, Mr. Ambassador, I want to get to China in a second, but I do want to start with the news that we just sort of hit. We don't know a lot about it, so I'm going to ask you to speculate. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent saying the U.S. is prepared or will put unprecedented economic pressure on Iran. 2-point question. Number one, do you believe this means we will reduce the kinetic war, the actual fighting around Iran? And any clues as to what this economic pressure might be?
Well, I think we're waiting for the details, but certainly there's been talk about strengthening the blockade again and restricting further the shipping out of oil and other products out of the Persian Gulf. There are more sanctions to be provided on Iran and potentially on buyers of Iranian oil as well. I don't think it necessarily means that the kinetic action is going to decrease. I think really the president is faced with 3 not terribly good options. One is to escalate both economically and militarily and take control effectively of the Strait of Hormuz. It comes at a great cost. One is to capitulate and basically go back to the MOU that was agreed to with Iran, where Iran insisted that the U.S. pull back from Iran, stop threatening it, pull back from attacking or supporting Israel's efforts vis-a-vis Hezbollah, and release frozen assets. And the third is to continue on this kind of stalemate where we escalate and de-escalate by week, depending on where we are on the diplomatic and on the military side of things. So there aren't a lot of great choices right now, but certainly strengthening the economic sanctions and the military pressure is one track that the president may well go down.
Do you think that it would work? Michael, do you think that we'd be able to apply a specific amount of economic pressure that would effectively break Iranian will and any Iranian resistance?
I think normal sanctions, we've seen a raft after raft of sanctions, and Iran has demonstrated a great capacity to absorb pain and continue on the path they've been on. And the big question is, if you had a blockade, an effective blockade in place for an extended period of time, obviously we would have to live with higher oil prices, but Iran ultimately would have difficulty getting its oil out of the ground. They would have to shut in wells, and as you know, that's a very expensive and long-term damaging process where it's hard to get your oil back going again once you've shut in your production. And we've not gone that far. We've not put the blockade in for that long to force that situation. So we don't know whether that would actually ultimately change Iran's trajectory. The Revolutionary Guard gets a lot of its revenue from the oil sector. And so if you effectively cut that off, the theory is you might create divisions within the government or further divisions within the government between the Revolutionary Guard and others, and perhaps change the negotiating position.
Michael, I want to ask you about an article that you published yesterday in Foreign Affairs called "The Next Global Economic Crisis Could Be Made in China." What makes you concerned about an economic crisis there? What's some of the evidence?
So everybody's been concerned about Chinese overcapacity, and they're exporting that overcapacity to the rest of the world, the impact that's had on the rest of the world. But we're now reaching a state where two things are going on. One, on the political side, more and more countries are saying we're going to go down the road of protectionism to keep Chinese excess capacity out of our market. The U.S. has, for example, effectively closed our market to electric vehicles from China. Europe, which is ideologically more committed to free trade than the U.S. historically, it is now beginning to pursue protectionist measures as well, as it sees itself losing jobs in the auto sector, closing down factories. That has big political and social ramifications for Europe. And major emerging economies who want to have a manufacturing sector, whether it's Brazil or India or South Africa or others, Indonesia, they too want to resist the dumping of products from China that are undermining their capacity to pursue that. So that's one thing that's going on, is simply the rise of protectionism globally. And secondly, it's the law of arithmetic. It was one thing for China to export substantially more faster than the global growth of trade when it was 10% of the global economy. But now it's 25% of the global economy. It's 30% of all manufacturing. It's heading towards 45% of all manufacturing. In certain sectors like EVs, it can produce virtually 16% of global demand for the product, if not more. At that scale, the more it continues to export in excess of global demand, it just is unsustainable. And so you can see it collapsing on itself, where markets close, there isn't sufficient demand, and all of these companies in China that are operating at narrow to negative margins begin to implode, and that's going to affect Chinese growth. And when Chinese growth is affected, it affects all those countries that are also dependent on China. China is the #1 trading partner for so many emerging economies and developing countries. When they see a reduction in Chinese demand, they too will be affected, and they're all carrying a lot of debt. And so it has all the makings of a global financial crisis where demand gets hit because of the Chinese economic strategy beginning to collapse on itself, and that those who trade with China are beginning to see the effects as well, and the U.S. could well be left holding the bag.
Yeah, I mean, the headline in the Wall Street Journal this morning: there aren't enough ships to handle China's booming car exports. So that story is well known, but maybe getting to a more extreme point. Michael, you would think the Chinese authorities are broad terms aware of all this, and maybe it explains part of the urgency for them to invest so heavily in AI, in their own domestic AI capacity, their own kind of tech infrastructure, and maybe they feel as if that's an escape hatch.
They certainly know that this is an issue, and the U.S. and others have been pressing China literally for 2 decades to reform their economy, to move towards domestic demand-led growth, to put in place a real social safety net so that consumers don't save 50% of their income. So the problem is well known. The solutions are well known. I think the challenge is this is the playbook they go back to export excess manufacturing capacity because it's worked so well for them in the past, and it just may be running out of room. And as you said, you got to find another sector. The property sector's grown and bubbled and now collapsed. It's hard to find another sector that can replace export-led growth in the same way in terms of driving Chinese growth. AI can do some, and certainly they are investing heavily in that and in biotech, but it's not the kind of sector that's going to necessarily employ so much of the Chinese population and account for 30% of their growth as exports are currently accounting for.
So with that, you can kind of see in Asia how the curse is starting to emerge that I've been talking about for over a year. On 9/11/2026, there's a curse that's coming. If Trump doesn't solve the problem in the Middle East by 9/11/2026, there will be a curse that affects the whole world. It's going to be geopolitical stress, economic stress, agricultural stress, climate issues, there's a curse coming down because Trump was given a blessing. He decided to not do what he needed to do because he's a chicken. He tacoed out, and now there's a curse coming. Now, some people might say, oh, no, I don't think so. Well, all right. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think I am. But the thing is you can kind of see everything emerging that is going to lead to a lot of social human stress. Now, things happen in a sequence, like a fib sequence, a Fibonacci sequence. And little things may represent a larger situation, and larger situations can be used as a model to understand little things. Now, what do I mean by that? A system, a complex system, has emergent behavior. That sailor had stress, 19-year-old, first deployment, 250 days out, and he decided to jump ship. As it's an individual sailor under stress. What do you think that the whole world would be like if it had a similar non-stop stress type situation? Now, this curse that I'm talking about on 9/11/2026 is going to last for 2 years. So with all those lockdowns from the COVID era, and then all of a sudden you have a 2-year problem that takes place where people are fearful, there's going to be a similar stress that's happening on the USS Abraham Lincoln, where society will have mental breakdown. It's coming, it's coming. All right, we're going to play China expert Gordon Chang predicts how war in East Asia could begin. Now, if you're President Xi and you want to take Taiwan, and you know the United States doesn't have enough ships, the deployment in the Middle East has stressed out the military, and the United States doesn't have enough munitions. Why don't you just blockade? Why don't you just blockade Taiwan? The United States can't do anything about it. Trump has weakened us substantially.
And cyber capabilities as new concerns grow over a potential attack on Taiwan by Beijing. Russia reportedly helping China close a critical U.S. military gap, sharing submarine technology that could make Chinese subs harder to detect. China-linked hackers also reportedly are carrying out a new AI-driven cyber attack on Taiwan, targeting government systems and other critical infrastructure. Joining me now is Gaystone Institute senior fellow Gordon Chang. Gordon, the Chinese continue to make these.
You still think that this curse isn't coming? It's blinking red. Trump was given a blessing in Butler, Pennsylvania, where he wasn't assassinated. He was given the blessing to live another day. But it wasn't so you can have less taxes. It wasn't no tax on tips, or all of the executive orders, or kicking out illegal immigrants, which we should be doing. No, that wasn't the reason. The reason was to actually kill Esau. And Esau is represented with the Persians in Iran. This is the theocratic regime of Iran. This is the Ayatollah and that whole line. And it is the IRGC. And when Trump does that, a blessing will happen. But Trump's afraid. He was afraid in the third week of the war to actually use ground troops and control the strait. And if he did that, do you think we would have this problem? Absolutely not. But because he was afraid, we have a problem. And it's getting worse. And the blessing he was given, he didn't uphold his bargain. Now, either he's too stupid to see this, or he has developed this hubris, thinking that he's like at the casino and he'll always get the winning number. But then all of a sudden he throws snake eyes and all of a sudden everything's gone. That's where we're approaching here. Trump is fucking things up. And you know that he knows he's fucked things up. You know why? Because he's not saying anything about it. So let me get this straight. He had to hide in a catering transit container because they were worried about the plane getting blown away. And he seems to be radio silent on what's really going on with the USS Abraham Lincoln. And why isn't Trump's administration pushing back? Which administration actually shrunk the military? What administration actually prevented the Navy from building more ships? And talk about that Congress coinciding with that president and why we have the problem that we have. When we're in a conflict, we don't have enough ships to rotate them. That's a problem. And that's not a problem that you can fix right away. To fix that problem, you're looking at 8-10 years because of how long it takes to build these ships. Once again, our Pentagon has weakened us. Once again, our Congress has weakened us. Once again, certain policies that were instituted within the executive branch have weakened us.
And the threat against Taiwan continues. Your reaction?
China is trying to strangle Taiwan. We see these activities, especially in the first 2 weeks of June in the waters east of the island. But China right now, its military is in no position to invade the main island of Taiwan. With all the purges for Xi Jinping, we are seeing at the top of the Chinese military that senior officers, just the positions are vacant. On the Communist Party Central Military Commission, which controls the Chinese military, there are only 2 of 7 seats filled. One is Xi Jinping himself, who's not a military officer, and the other is a political commissar, which means there are no operational officers at the top. And that means that China has to intimidate Taiwan into submission because it can't use force. And the people in Taiwan understand that. And I think that really China's moves are stiffening their opposition to Chinese rule, not the other way around.
Well, Gordon, when you were on the program with me on Monday, we were talking about, these reports that the Chinese are giving the Iranians technology. The Russians are giving them components, helping them with surveillance. And that relationship and that aid, this is an issue as we're looking to Xi Jinping coming to the United States next month and to be hosted by President Trump. I had Steve Yates on the program and I asked him about your take on all of this. Listen to what he told me.
I think that when it comes to China's calculus, there's always the caveat of if they are rational. And if they're rational, then they would know that whatever armaments are relevant to what we're doing in Iran are very, very different than what would be used and needed in Asia-related contingencies, different geography, different distances, different mix of allies and capabilities. I think that the armaments issue is largely something that will get addressed. I don't believe it's as dire as is talked about, although we have to be responsible.
with what we do. And I think that we are in a better place than we've been in decades with regard to the first island chain in the Indo-Pacific. Japan is more serious in investing and developing advanced technology. The Pentagon has appropriately engaged with the Philippines, who has really sobered up about what China is doing in China.
If China actually did a blockade on Taiwan, I'm willing to bet that Trump would talk tough but wouldn't do anything. And our allies in the region don't have enough military capability to actually stop it. That's what's going to happen. It's going to be very similar to what Biden said when Putin went to invade Ukraine at the very beginning. Ukraine's probably going to fall. Trump doesn't have the balls to fight.
On the Philippines makes clear this isn't about internal politics in China. This isn't just about Taiwan. It's really about freedom of navigation, freedom of the people in Asia, and which model of development you really want. On that, we're doing well, but we need to do better.
So that was a different part of my conversation with Steve, and my apologies, Gordon. But when I did ask him about that, he said that he agreed with you that we need to be very cognizant of the fact that China's calculus is by supporting Iran that you do see munitions depleted. That strengthens China.
Yes, but Xi Jinping doesn't trust his general officers. And that is something that is driving their behavior. So Xi Jinping can huff and puff, he can try to intimidate us, which he is very good at doing. But at the end of the day, they're just not ready to do what we really fear. Now, I do worry about China backing into a confrontation, and I think that may even be probable because we see really belligerent Chinese activity at Second Thomas Shoal and Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. That's against the Philippines. We also see very provocative activity in the East China Sea against Japan at the islands that the Japanese call the Senkakus and the Chinese call the Diaoyus. So I think that if there is one of these confrontations blows up into something bigger, I don't think Xi Jinping has the ability to back down. He cannot act constructively. And that's how the war starts in East Asia. It doesn't start with Xi Jinping saying, I'm invading Taiwan this afternoon. It starts through an accident that no one can control.
Oh, well, okay. Well, let's talk about AI in China, because they are putting new resources into their own AI chip industry. They're trying to develop alternatives to NVIDIA. And that company, meanwhile, teaming up with Wall Street, they lined up $500 billion to finance AI infrastructure. China's cheaper domestic chips, though, could put pressure on the value of NVIDIA's hardware. Gordon, I wanted to get your take on this, and you and Maria talk so much about this, because how big of a threat is China's chip making to NVIDIA, in your opinion, right now?
Yeah, NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, I think that they have big leads on China. We got to remember that China has been trying to build a chip industry, not just in the last 10 years, but really the last 20. They poured enormous amounts of resources into their companies, and they're still far behind. And I think that is a reflection of American innovation and our scale. Now, yes, they will make advances, but so will we, because we're not standing still. And NVIDIA is an enormously strong company. So, yes, we always be worried about what the Chinese are doing, but we got to remember that we've got a lot of strengths. China can make very important advances in AI. Their frontier technology and models are really good, and they can get them adopted because they're cheap. But at the end of the day, we've got compute. That's an enormous advantage that we hold, and thanks to NVIDIA and other companies.
That's a very good point. Very good point, Gordon. Real quick before you go, I have to ask you about something else that's happening with China. So they've got this homegrown C-919 Comac plane. Reportedly, it's going to make its first scheduled international commercial flight. So they're trying to start to compete with Boeing and Airbus. I mean, China has always had to buy from Boeing and Airbus. And the plane still has a lot of Western components in it. It hasn't received any certification for the U.S. or Europe, meaning it cannot land here in our country. It can't land in Europe. But should we be concerned about them trying to make moves into the aviation industry? Is it a threat to Boeing, in your opinion?
Of course.
It is a threat to Boeing and to Airbus. The C919 has been much slower in development than the Chinese wanted, but I think that was a smart decision on the part of the Chinese central government. Again, though, you got to remember that Boeing and Airbus, they're not standing still. And they're innovating, and the C919, although it made its first international flight to Mongolia, is still well behind. It is not really a competitor. The only thing they can do is discount that plane, but it's not nearly comparable to what the Western duopoly offers.
Yeah, and I can't see U.S. or European regulators giving the go-ahead for the aircraft to come here or to land there. Gordon Chang, it's always a great to have you on the program. Thank you so much for being with me this morning.
Thank you, Cheryl.
All right, Gordon Chang. Well, we've got a lot more coming up.
Design critiques are fast, people talk over you. I found granola and I've been using it for a month already. I discovered it because they had like a new website launch and it was pretty big in the design community. It's one of my favorite websites. It's very simple but very beautiful. But anyways, I decided to test it out and I really love it. It's so seamless how it works. So over here in my notes, I can see that there's a lot of talk.
We're going to go to CNBC talking about diversification within the equity exposure. But before we do, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the Gladiator Barley. This will help to build muscle, bring down inflammation, soak up free radicals, and detoxify your body. Do some resistance training and take the Gladiator Barley. It's a great way to get healthy. Or the Heirloom Barley. Now you get all the benefits except building muscle. It'll detoxify your body, bring down inflammation, and soak up free radicals. And when you do detoxify your body, bring down that inflammation and soak up free radicals, you're improving your immune system, your endocrine system, your cardiovascular system, brain function. When you bring down these chronic elevated levels of inflammation and free radicals, you're slowing down the aging process. It's really important. The Heirloom Barley or the Gladiator Barley, take it every day. Digestive enzyme complex, really important to reduce the load on your pancreas. It helps to digest proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. You'll be able to absorb your nutrients better and reduce that load on your pancreas. Super important for individuals that are 40 years of age or older. This also helps if you're an athlete and you're doing your pre or post fueling after your sport. Take the digestive enzyme complex to help break up those carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. And vitamin D3. Vitamin D3 is dual purpose. It is a gene expression cofactor, so your cells perform properly. It helps to get rid of cells that are infected. It helps them to go into apoptosis. Vitamin D3 helps with the cardiovascular system and helps to build denser bone. So please go to my store and get the vitamin D3. It's the-studio-reykjavik.com.
Armstrong, he's head of multi-asset for the Americas at Schroders, which is more than $1 trillion in assets under management. So, all right, we have this set up here. People have been celebrating a very good earnings season. We had a little bit of a scare that the Fed was going to have to start to push back. Now that's getting priced out. What is a multi-asset investor supposed to be doing? What are we rethinking right now in this concept?
It's really interesting because as a multi-asset investor, you've got the whole world as your oyster.
Yeah.
And we have been very long equities for the past 3 years. And every month when we come back to these conversations and say, where are we now? We look at that and we still see that equities drive. And you sort of feel as a multi-asset investor, maybe I should be doing something different. What is interesting is the opportunity within equities. So to really broaden out, we think you want to stay long U.S. exceptionalism, long U.S. technology, but think about how you can complement that because that risk within the trade of that one AI trade is very significant from here.
This notion of broadening out, I feel like everybody hopes for it, maybe plays for it. It's happened in these sort of phases, like these interludes, right? So late last October, it had this massive peak in the narrowness of the market. Then we broaden out. The S&P does nothing for several months. Underneath the surface, most stocks go up. We also saw the same thing just coming out of this latest period. Can that be more of a sustainable trend? I've looked at history and it says, look, you're not making progress in the headline index if you really see the majority of stocks outperform.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not unusual to see concentration within equity indexes. What is unusual is the degree to which we've seen that and the single risk factor from that AI trend. So I think you should expect this to come in waves, but that is where diversification works. So if you had been diversified across that supply chain, you weren't as sensitive to the semiconductor meltdown. You look at value outside the US, cyclicals, bank stocks in Europe. I mean, we had a period where the bank stocks in Europe have been outperforming the Mag 7. So it is working if you stay disciplined.
How easy is it, though, to truly diversify away from the AI trade? I ask that because you mentioned bank stocks, for example. A big reason that they've been propelled to the upside is because they've been able to really draw a link to their role and their participation in AI, in financing the AI build out. You can see that across a variety of sectors as well. So does the diversification truly work if you're worried about some sort of reversal in the AI ecosystem or the AI economy?
I mean, I think it's true that you're going to see, if you had an AI meltdown, this is going to impact the entire market. So diversification alone is not going to help you. But where it works is, you think that bank example, the banks that we've really seen a lot of opportunity in have been European banks. They are not as involved in the AI financing. I'm not saying they're not involved, but they're not as involved. They're really trading off the yield curve in Europe, the resurgence in some of the financing activity happening in Europe, which is a much more banked economy.
I know you don't have S&P 500 targets, but if you take an earnings estimate of 365 for the S&P this year, put on the valuation, you get to about 78.50, we're at 78.35. So you're optimistic on the stocks, but your not target, your sort of default zone is about where we are. Sure. Do you want to look to raise that?
So I think to see stocks drive higher, which we think is going to happen, you're either going to see earnings continue to beat, and it is interesting because we've had earnings estimates rising this year. Normally you'd see them being cut by this point in the year. We continue to see analysts raising their earnings estimates. So earnings may continue to power equities ahead above expectations, or we may get an expansion in multiples. The other thing that can happen, of course, is you look at the tech rally that we've had coming back off the lows, right? It is that opportunity for different pockets of the market to take that leadership away from just the core names that have worked over the past 3 months.
Today's threats don't ask to be downloaded. They ask to be trusted. That's where NordVPN's next-gen antivirus comes in.
Explosive. They expect a $500 billion market for that technology next year. That's up from just $70 billion last year. And they say the structure of some of these deals, which come with financial guarantees for SanDisk to sell the technology, is going to benefit them as well. So that stock rising and building on a 14% rally yesterday after their investor day.
Pretty incredible move there. All right, let's switch it up to Reddit.
So some more optimism elsewhere in the broader tech complex. Reddit, the social media company, ticker RDDT, they're getting a boost after the announcement that they're going to join the S&P 500 index. That's prior to the beginning of trading on Tuesday. They're replacing Avalon Bay Communities, which is being acquired. And the announcement that's set to bring in passive buying for this stock, a huge amount of money is indexed to the S&P 500. Also some active managers that are benchmarked against it might consider buying the stock. And it's giving a bit of relief to Reddit, which is still down about 23% this year. All right, one more. I've also been watching a name called York Space System, that's ticker YSS, which is down about 12% after the satellite company slashed its revenue outlook for the year. They now see $375 million to $405 million, down from $545 million to $595 million. So a big cut there. Now, some of that is to do with the structure of their contracts. They say the government is kind of back-weighting how they assign contracts for some military applications of the technology. So maybe they'll get that money eventually, just not this year. But I actually covered this IPO back in January, back when everyone was excited about aerospace and defense, and it's really slid since. Feels like they went public just a bit too late, maybe.
Okay, very good. Matthew, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Matthew Griffin, equity supporter for Bloomberg News. For more conversations like this, subscribe to our Stock Movers Reports. Listen for 5-minute audio reports on the biggest winners and losers in the market. Subscribe. The Stock Movers on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen. We got some U.S. retail sales earlier this morning, and the retail sales fell in July by the most more than a year as consumers pull back on purchases at online stores and auto dealers. Let's break down the retail numbers. We can do that with Mari Shore. She's a senior equity analyst at Columbia Threadneedle. Mari, what did you make of the retail sales print we got this morning?
Yes, thank you for having me. I think there is a lot of focus on the sequential slowdown, as just mentioned, but I think that deceleration can be easily explained by two things. Number one was the Amazon Prime Day shift into June, which hurt spending in non-store retail. And then also on the auto side, as you said, we saw greater strength in that category earlier in the quarter ahead of anticipated tariff increases. And so that category slowdown makes sense to me. And I think when you put those two things aside and you look at the underlying strength in categories like general merchandise and apparel and health and wellness, we actually saw sequential increases there. So when I look at the underlying demand trends and the health of the consumer, and this has been further supported by commentary from some of the large banks, the outlook is very stable. And I think that the spending remains solid. But we've been talking for some time about the widening gap between winners and losers in retail, and that trend continues.
So that trend continues, and it kind of mirrors what's happening across the economy overall. We got data this week on consumer and wholesale inflation, and that showed that price increases are slowing. They're moderating a bit. Do you see evidence of that in this retail sales report?
Not quite yet in the retail sales report, but I do think that that is to come. As you said, in the inflation data, we did see an acceleration in some categories like consumer electronics, which are sensitive to what's happening with pricing in memory chips. But outside of that, a lot of the retailers have talked about their plans to use tariff refunds to reinvest in lower prices, because they all acknowledge the importance of value in driving traffic and sales. So I would anticipate further disinflation in some of the general merchandise categories, but also on the food side as we move through the rest of this year.
Mari, what are the retailers saying about the consumer these days? How much promotion is needed to get the folks in the stores and buying? What's the overall sense of the consumer?
You know, we have seen some mixed data on the low-end consumer. Of course, that consumer is most sensitive to changes in gas prices, but some of the data that we've seen, like come out of the Bank of America credit card panel, shows actually improving spending and wage growth at the low end, which is a little bit of a head scratcher and honestly a trend that we have not seen for some time. On the other hand, the trend at the higher income level remains very solid. And so, you know, we have yet to hear from a lot of the big retailers, and especially some of the larger retailers and dollar stores exposed to the low end. But the credit card data would suggest pretty healthy spending from the dollar stores and Walmart. And most are expecting comp store sales growth in the 3-ish% range for those companies. So I think overall the outlook for the consumer is solid, but of course all the retailers acknowledge that the consumer is still very discerning and really focused on value and convenience.
All right, good stuff. Mari, really appreciate your joining us on this Retail Sales Day. Mari Shore is an analyst, senior equity analyst at Columbia Threadneedle Investments with a specialization in retailers. Let's stay on this theme of retailers and retail spending. Julia Fanzaris is our U.S. economy reporter, and she's picked up on a theme here, which is that U.S. consumers are increasingly willing to spend on hobbies, sporting goods, musical instruments, things that, you know, they feel is worth their quality time, even if it means sacrificing some savings along the way. Julia, there's data that backs this up, isn't there?
There's a lot of data that backs this up. It's even retail sales data that came out. So for the past couple months, This hobby, the hobby, sports goods, musical instruments, and crafts category has been one of the only resilient categories continuously increasing month over month and also year over year. It's also interesting that the amount that Americans are spending on hobbies as a share of their overall disposable income is at a record high, which is very fascinating. We've been hearing about these trends for a while, but seeing them translate, economists have now been keeping a close eye on them as a gauge of whether consumers still have that extra room to spend on what they want.
And it's not me on hobbies. I'm not doing the whole game thing or the hobbies. Who are these people?
Your hobby is the beach.
Yeah, exactly. Who are these people?
I have to say these people are me. I bought a $200 sewing machine earlier this year, and it's fascinating because this entire trend has actually spanned multiple generations. PNC credit card data shows that every single generation, their spending has grown on hobby trends, and the Michael CEO had said the same thing to me yesterday when we were on the phone, that the fascinating part of this trend and the unusual part is it's not just Gen Z finding crafts being fun, but it is a bunch of different generations fueling this boom.
That is fascinating. And I guess a part of this is also an analog boom. So it speaks to this idea that people are actively turning away from being online, doing things virtually and doing things more tactily.
Yeah.
Right, tactilely.
How do I get my IT People want to get back outside. This happened with COVID, the desire to, you need to get out there. So that's when the boom started. And people started getting out there. They want to get back to crafts. They want to have.
All right, we're going to go to when the retail sales were issued earlier this morning and how Bloomberg reported it. But before we do, please go to my store at the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the structural nano silver toothpaste. This will whiten your teeth, freshen your breath, bring down inflammation at the gum level, improve your gum health. It will neutralize because it has the structural nano silver, so that's very important every day, but especially during the cold season. And with good oral hygiene, you're helping your cardiovascular system and your valves. A lot of people don't realize poor oral hygiene can cause problems. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the structural nano silver toothpaste.
Sales data are disappointing. We thought they might be a little bit lower, and they're a lot bit lower. Retail sales on a headline basis down by 0.6%. The forecast was for a 0.1% rise. Retail sales ex-auto down 0.3. Retail sales ex-auto and gas down 0.2. Now, of course, gasoline prices were lower during the month. And retail sales control, the part that goes into GDP, the part that economists tend to watch, is down by 0.4. It was up by 0.5% last month, at least on an unrevised basis. So we're going to have to check into to see where the weakness is in this, but it's definitely a disappointing report, and it may add to some of the do not raise rates thoughts that people are having on Wall Street right now.
Yeah, Mike, I'll let you dig through some of the details and just give you a read of markets. You can see equity futures still positive, pretty much across the board. You are seeing not necessarily some sort of read through in terms of negativity. In fact, if anything, a more positive, up 0.1% in the S&P futures, Nasdaq up 0.25%, Russell 2000 now turning just marginally positive. 2s, 10s, and 30s, a little bit more interesting. As Mike was saying, giving a little bit more heft to the idea that this Fed can remain on hold. Now we're looking at that 2-year yield lower by 4 basis points, 4.0999%. Are we going to see these yields fall below 4% once again before that September meeting? 10-year yields lower by almost 2 basis points, 4.63%. But notably, the steeper yield curve, 30-year yields still elevated at 5.22%. We'll let Michael McKee keep parsing through this and let us know when you have more. If you are just joining us, retail sales month over month down by 0.6% versus the expectation of a 0.1% rise. When you take a look at the control group, down 0.4%. The expectation had been an increase of 0.3%. And added to this, there was a downgrade to the June read, 0.4% revision was rather than 0.5%. Just want to bring in Aditya Bahave of Bank of America, who has been sticking with their 75 basis point rate hike call for this year. Aditya, does this change anything for you based on this data?
So it doesn't. We were expecting July retail sales to be soft. The control group actually came in slightly stronger than what we were expecting. We had a very weak number. This is the signal from the BAC card data. But the strength of that data is that it also tells us the intra-month trajectory, and then going into August, it tells us what happened. So basically, you had a dip at the start of the month, which is consistent with the pull forward of Prime Day into June, as well as the heat wave right around July 4th weekend. And then a recovery going into the end of the month, and by the first week of August, actually, you're seeing year-over-year spending numbers that are very similar to the very strong numbers that we saw in May and June. So this really, really looks like a one-off. It looks like a blip. I would just look through it.
Well, Aditya, stay close. Mike has a bit more. Michael McKee's been parsing through the numbers. What jumps out to you as the reason for this disappointment?
Vehicles, put it that way, because we saw motor vehicles and part sales down 1.8% and gasoline stations down 0.9%. Remember, the gas prices went down during the month of July, and it looked like people were holding off on buying cars. But most of the rest of the categories did rise, with the exception of non-store retailers, down 2.2%. And as we said earlier, Prime Days were in June this year instead of July. So you can understand why that happened. But you have strength in clothing, up 1.9%, which is probably the beginning of back to school season. General merchandise stores were up by 0.3%, and electronics was one other weak area, down 0.5%. But building materials up 0.3%, health and personal care up 0.7%. So it looks like people were still spending money. They just may have moved it into different categories that it changed the mix of this and led to it being down some more than anticipated.
You're up for your season at Masper.
They're changing the mix, and the overall amount is gone down. So retail sales are less. So people are spending less. It's a problem. But there's still inflation. So what will the Fed do? Will it lower rates, stay steady with the rate, or will it increase because of inflation being too high? It's projected that inflation is at 3.4% annualized. The expectation for 1 year inflation just came from the UMich data is 4.3. The Fed has to raise rates to control inflation. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the structural nanosilver gel in the tube form or in the quick dispenser called Renew. It's dual purpose. You can use it as a daily skincare, put it on a cut. It'll help to heal the cut quicker. During the cold season or the allergy season, lightly coat your nostrils. It stays active for 5.5 hours. It's really simple. Just make sure you have some. You never know when you need it. Cleanse, which is 30 parts per million, or Max 35, which is 35 parts per million. Take either one every day. Take a teaspoon amount, swish it in your mouth, gargle about 30 seconds, and then swallow it. What this will do is neutralize, improve your oral cavity, your oral pharynx, help to maintain that mucosal barrier, and help the health of the epithelial cells. That way your innate immune system is boosted up. I've been doing this protocol for over 6 years every day. And boosting up that innate immune system will help to mitigate any problems during the allergy season or during the cold season. But do it every day, but especially during the cold season. And I highly recommend that you stock up, because maybe something's going to happen. Boomer Boost. Boomer Boost has 68 nutrients. It has all the minerals and the vitamins that you need on a daily basis to help with your overall health and wellness. But it also has a lot of other supplements in this that will help other systems like brain function, cardiovascular system, help to control your BMI, your A1C levels, help to improve your immune system and endocrine system, have a steady burn of energy throughout the whole day, no spiking, so your cellular metabolism is sped up. So please go to my store and get the Boomer Boost. Take it every day. It is a cornerstone for slowing down the aging process. Now, my protocol is really simple. Probiotic is the foundation. The first pillar Max 35 or cleanse to boost up that innate immune system. The second pillar, C60, to soak up free radicals. The third pillar, turmeric, ashwagandha, and lignans to help with your cardiovascular system, your immune system, your endocrine system, brain function. And Boomer Boost revs up that cellular metabolism, and you have a steady burn of energy, but you get a lot of other benefits from it. These all work together to help slow down the aging process. So you're methylating your genes less, your telomere lengths will be longer on average in your tissues. You're bringing down inflammation, you're soaking up those free radicals, and all these different organ systems that you have are going to perform better. You're going to slow down the aging process. So please go to my store and stack accordingly.
Bloomberg's legal analyst in just a moment to get further details on that. But in the midst of that, before that, let's focus on the muni business, because it's Friday, and that's what we do here. Focus on Munis is brought to you by BAM Mutual. Put America's strength to work in your portfolio with BAM insured municipal bonds. Protect your investments with an added layer of security and guaranteed income. Invest with strength. Build a stronger tomorrow with BAM Mutual. Dan Close joins us. He's head of municipals for Nuveen, based out there in Chicago. Dan, talk to us about the municipal bond market. How's the performance been this year so far to date?
And thank you so much for having me on the show. July was a little bit rough. We had a great first half of the year. And July, we gave back a lot, about 185 basis points or so. But, I think what's been interesting to see is with U.S. Treasuries now backed up, about 50 basis points on the year for the 10-year part. Munis are still up on the year. We're up about 125 basis points, outpacing the broader Bloomberg Ag, outpacing just about everything else in fixed income. So made a nice recovery so far in August, but July was a little bit tougher, but looking forward to the rest of the year. I think we're set up nicely.
So what are the technicals for the second half of the year, the rest of the year? What does demand look like? What does supply look like in particular?
Yeah, sure. Year to date, we've had 33 weeks or so of the year. 31 of those weeks, we've had positive inflows. So that's been very, very encouraging. We've had about 38 billion versus about 10 billion same period last year. So we're seeing a lot of issuance, but I think the really instructive part is we've had more bond calls, more bonds maturing, tender sinker than new issue. So we had this negative net supply that's been a nice tailwind, and we're really seeing a nice tailwind in August with about plus 20 billion or so of recycled money versus expected new issuance.
So give us a sense of duration here. How far on the curve do you think you want to go here in the municipal market?
Yeah, right now, the municipal yield curve versus this time or so last year, we've seen a decent flattening, but we still think there's room to go. For investors who are comfortable going a little bit further out in the curve, that 18 to 22-year part we like in particular. The muni market has a lot of call provisions on their debts, so extending a couple of years extra in maturity, especially for buying premium bonds, really doesn't add additional duration to your portfolio. So we really like that part of the curve. As well, we think the 10-year part has gotten beaten up enough that it bears looking at for those investors who are looking a little bit shorter.
And before we let you go, Dan, we know that a lot of states are targeting high earners with these income or wealth taxes. They want to, of course, fill their coffers. So that leads to demand for tax-exempt munis. Which states are you looking at? What are the prospects for, tax-exempt munis in those states?
Yeah, it started with Massachusetts a couple years back, 2022. They put in a millionaire's tax, which was a 4% surcharge. From 23 to 25, they collected more than 2 times what they budgeted. And I think a lot of other states said, wow, that's a great idea. Let's see if we could do something similar. So Maine put on a 2% surcharge for millionaires. Rhode Island put on a 3% surcharge. And what we're seeing right now is the state of Washington is going to enact a millionaire's tax in March, which they formerly did not have an income tax. They're proposing 9.9% to go into effect. And, for muni business, I can speak for Nuveen. We've had enough inquiry and enough demand for state of Washington paper. We opened a new separately managed account strategy. So those states that are enacting these higher limits, we're certainly seeing a lot more activity. In a state like California that's trying to pass a billionaire's tax, we think that this momentum will continue.
Dan, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Dan Close, head of municipals for Nuveen. Let's get back to this news story that just crossing the tape recently. Luigi Mangione will plead guilty to resolve federal charges related to the fatal shooting of United Health Group executive Brian Thompson. His lawyer said in court on Friday. Get some more color on that. We're pleased to welcome June Grasso. She is our legal analyst at Bloomberg here. June, I guess we've started hearing about this last couple of days, but what do you think going on behind the scenes here?
That's hard to know because he's pleading guilty. He's in court now, and they're going through the allocution where the judge has to, find out if he's in the right state of mind, if he's doing this of his own accord, if he knows all his rights that he has, and that now he's giving up the right to a trial. So she's going through all that now. He's going to plead to both counts in federal court, both counts of stalking, which could carry a life sentence. And apparently the prosecution has said they're going to ask for that. So it's hard to know what went on behind the scenes. It appears that what's happening is the defense is taking a chance that the judge is not going to sentence him to life, because it's up to the judge finally, and that they can use that to try to block the New York trial, which on the basis of double jeopardy. And New York's double jeopardy law is stronger even than the federal law. So I can't tell why they're doing this. Perhaps the evidence is so strong against him that they, that there's no hope. They feel like there's no hope that he'll come out even with a trial where one juror, hangs up the trial. But it's hard to imagine because he's pleading guilty. That means that he's going to tell the judge exactly what happened. He's going to recite what he did. So that can be used against him in state court if that trial ever does go forward. Mm-hmm. So, it's hard for me to understand what's going on and why they took this drastic measure.
What's the timeline for his potentially facing trial for the New York charges?
Right, that would start in September, but I suppose that will be put off right now because there are going to be motions, to get rid of that trial because of, as I said, double jeopardy. And, his attorneys from the very beginning were arguing that this was double jeopardy. And it certainly seems like it because normally you have a murder in the middle of Manhattan. What are the federal authorities? Why are they bringing charges here? It really has nothing to do with the federal government. But at that time, Pam Bondi wanted to get the death penalty for him, and that's a federal case. So they brought this, and then the judge here the federal judge ruled that the death penalty wasn't death penalty eligible. So it put him in this bind where he had a state trial and a federal trial, and whatever happened, whatever it was admitted in one would be admissible in the other. So it really put him in a bind, whereas maybe if there weren't any federal charges, he would go forward with the trial and take his chances that they might be able to hang up the jury.
What do you think the New York lawyers will do? Will they go ahead with the case, or will they say, oh, wait, life in prison from the federal level, we're done?
I've read some stories that the New York DA is not all that happy about what's happening. He feels like they're being squeezed out of their trial. So, you always want to protect your turf, I think. And this really is a Manhattan trial. It's not a federal trial. So I think that they'll probably fight to keep the trial, but that might be a losing battle.
All right, very good, Jude. Thank you so much for coming in here and helping us out here with this story here. Let's get back to the markets here. A little bit of red on the screen, but it's a summer Friday and it's kind of quiet and all kinds of things going on. There's certainly technology news here. Workday buyout would signal low AI risk. Anurag Rana joins us here. Anurag, talk to us about Workday. What's going on there?
So, Paul, if you remember, we came back at, I think, January, February timeframe when we did a big report saying that, all software is not created equal. Everything was down 40, 50%, at that time, just within a period of 1.5 months. And we had picked out SAP, Workday, Shopify, and ServiceNow as 4 vendors that are, best in class in their own category of what they do. And we said, these kinds of workflows are critical for an enterprise, and it's not going to be easy for a large language model to disrupt them. Now, at the same time, what I say doesn't matter, but at the end of the day, if somebody wants to go take them private, I think that really, is the real message, that if private equity wants to spend billions of dollars taking them private, then maybe there is value for a lot of these firms out there. And that's what we saw yesterday. There's some rumor out there that these guys may be taken private. And, we think if that happens, that really changes the narrative in the software landscape, which has been under pressure for the last 2 years or so.
And to just follow up on that, Workday shares jumped after a Reuters report that private equity firm Silver Lake is in talks to purchase the software provider. And just puts context around that, Silver Lake, in my mind, is by far the #1 technology-focused private equity firm out there. Some of the smartest people, they've got a tremendous history of deal flow.
Yeah, it certainly sends a signal perhaps that SaaS apocalypse, whatever they were calling it, might be over as a result. So Anurag, if this continues to be something where they're negotiating this and Silver Lake, as Paul mentioned, a big name sending a message, what other companies might also be, being eyed for acquisitions?
So we have mentioned some of the others, but they're too large. I mean, just, frankly speaking, some of the ones we talked about, I said it's just too big for anybody to take private. But what it does is you just need to be honest, take care of one of them. The rest of the industry will come out, because right now investors just don't want to be in the software space. The only space for them is to just go buy memory or AI infrastructure or chips and leave everything else aside. And it's not good for the software industry, mostly because it's a very people-centric industry. So if the valuation keeps on depressed, all these employees will go out, leave, and then go to the model companies. And so this is just a good sign for everybody, frankly.
Anurag, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Anurag Ron is Senior Technology Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. And again, some of the software names you saw.
Please go to my store, bud-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the collagen. This will help with your skin, your nails, your hair, your cartilage, your musculature, and bone density. Please go to my store. Take the collagen every day. This is a month's supply. It's the-studio-reykjavik.com.
This is Bloomberg.
You, just you, building your app on base 44. Describe it.
Iran and the U.S. both claim to control the Strait of Hormuz as Tehran warns against miscalculation.
And as the U.S. Navy maintains its blockade of Iranian ports, CENTCOM is addressing what they're calling false reports about conditions aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln.
Jonathan Hunt is live from Tel Aviv. Jonathan.
Good morning to you guys. There has been some concern expressed about conditions on board the USS Lincoln by family members of those on board and some lawmakers. But Secretary of War Pete Hegseth said just yesterday that everyone on board, every ship in the Gulf is getting everything they need. And CENTCOM followed that up by saying some of the reporting about conditions on the Lincoln is flat out false, adding, quote, "The sailors and Marines of the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group remain resilient and resolved after more than 260 days at sea, 10,000 aircraft flights, and 1.5 million pounds of ordnance expended." In the meantime, the war of words over who controls the Strait of Hormuz goes on. Iran says it is in control and that no ship should attempt to transit the strait without first clearing it with what it calls Iran's powerful armed forces. Secretary of Energy Chris Wright hit back against that, saying, as President Trump has done, that the U.S. is very much in control. Here's the Secretary.
We know every day exactly how many ships transit the Strait of Hormuz, in and out. We know if they're going the southern route, the U.S. route through Omani waters. We know exactly what they're carrying. We're saying 8 to 9 million barrels a day going through the strait every day.
And Vice President Vance says with the U.S. patrolling the Strait of Hormuz on the border, of course, but also from the skies. The US will absolutely emerge the winner in all this. Here's the Vice President.
My warning to my fellow Republicans, Will, would be if we don't get this right, don't blame young people for being sympathetic to socialism. We've got to blame ourselves. Rebuilding our industrial base, rebuilding the heartland, making our streets safer, making it possible for young people to afford to buy a home. This is how you stop socialism. You don't stop socialism by throwing slogans at people about the free market. As much as I love the free market, you stop socialism by making people's lives better.
Obviously, that was not the Vice President talking about Iran. That was the Vice President talking about domestic politics. What he said about Iran was that the US will ultimately prevent Iran from ever getting a nuclear weapon and will bring the price of oil down ultimately for every American by fully reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Back to you guys.
All right, Jonathan Hunt.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.
Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the collagen. Collagen will help to remodel your joint. What this will do is recruit the material it needs to remodel the cartilage and also recruit the material that it needs to cushion the joint. It will block the pain gatekeeper, NAV 1.7, block inflammation by inhibiting EP4, and stop the erosion of the joint by inhibiting MMP3 and MMP13. So take this every day to help with remodeling a joint that is arthritic or if you have a sports injury. And I have Super Strong Relief. Super Strong Relief is dual purpose. It will help with pulled muscles, sprains, tension headaches, arthritis. Just apply it topically and it works within 90 seconds. It's for temporary relief, but it is very effective and it works very quickly. So please go to my store and get the Super Strong Relief, and you can stack this. You can stack it with the collagen as you're remodeling that arthritic joint. You take the collagen, you do these small exercises to help to remodel the joint and to reduce the pain as you're remodeling the joint. Take the Super Strong Relief. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. That's the end of my broadcast. Please share the links, ask your social media to follow me. Use discount 5 so you save some money. Go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Thank you for listening and participating, and see you in the next broadcast. Have a nice day.